Hi, I'm James Thomas Anthony Valvano, the son of Rocco and Angelina Valvano. And I'll tell you, I'm 45 years old, but I've had a heck of a lot happen in those 45 years from the time I was born in Corona, New York, right up until the time I won a national championship at North Carolina State University and what's happened after that. And pull up a chair. I'd like to tell you the story of Rocky and Angie's kid. What do I call it? Well, I guess the best title I could think of is I had a lifetime contract, and then they declared me dead. I love humor. I was brought up in a family that liked to laugh, and I like to laugh. And sometimes it's difficult to laugh. For example, April of 1990, when the place where I had worked for the last 10 years of my life, North Carolina State University, had decided to, well, how shall I say it, to part company with me. To step down, they asked me. You see, no one's ever really fired, but maybe you read about it in the papers. It did make an awful lot of headlines. Jim Valvano, the guy who in 1983 led his Wolfpack of North Carolina State to a monumental, at least it was in my family's eyes, victory over the Houston Cougars, the number one ranked team in the country, 54-52 in Albuquerque. Remember the scene? Maybe you watched it.
Down to low, a half minute left in the ball game. Wittenberg, double team, goes to Gannon. State has it spread out right now. A lob to Bailey, 25 seconds left. Thurl gets it back to Gannon, now to Wittenberg at the center line. Now long in the left corner, back down to Bailey on the left sideline, to Gannon in the middle. They're spread in four corners, back to Wittenberg, 14, 13. Now to Gannon. Gannon back to low, 10 seconds. Now Sidney goes to Bailey in the corner. 5 seconds left to Wittenberg. Wittenberg tries about a 30-footer. No good, step back. Lorenzo Charles, State! Lorenzo Charles slams it in. A missed shot from 35 feet. Lorenzo Charles grabbed it, stuffed it back in. The Cinderella team has done it. The glass slipper fit. The Wolfpack has won the national championship. All right, the Wolfpack has done it here in miraculous fashion.
From there, a lot of good things happened to me. At my own university, I was made the athletic director. I was given a lifetime contract. In fact, in just the previous fall in 1990, I was given the Distinguished Service Award from the university. So you can imagine the shock it was when I received a phone call from my lawyer, Mr. Woody Webb in North Carolina, who said, by the way, Jim, the university would like you to, as I mentioned, step down. We'd like to part company. Folks, I was fired. That's not funny. If it's ever happened to you, it's not funny. And so there I was saying, how do I get out of this? I mean, I don't want to go to my office at 9, 10 o'clock and have all the cameras there. You know what that's like, folks, And then crazy things go through your mind. How do you clean out your office? Never did that before. Where do you get the boxes? What do you just go to the A&P or someplace? Say, by the way, I need 14 boxes. And they say, is this to clean out your office, coach? Oh, how do they know? But everybody knows. So I decided I'd get there at about 5:30 before anybody was there so I could take everything, all the trophies, and yes, the Distinguished Service plaque itself, and go back and just kind of get out before the cameras came. So this depressed Jim Valvano, who loves to laugh, is sitting in his office when all of a sudden I look up, and there's some guy standing in the doorway of my office. And let me tell you how he's dressed, folks. I mean, this is not out of GQ. The man's got on a Chicago Cubs baseball cap. So you know he struggles anyway. And then he's got on work boots and khaki pants. And he hadn't shaved in, made Rip Van Winkle look like he was clean shaven. This guy did not look good. And he says to me, aren't you Coach Jim Valvano? I said, you got that wrong. I'm Mike Krzyzewski. And he said, you can't get away with that. I've seen you before. You're Coach Valvano. So I said, yeah, you got me. What can I do for you? And the young man would not walk away from the door, so I couldn't run out. And he said, I want some money. I mean, picture that, folks. I've already been declared dead in my job. Now I figure this guy is going to shoot me. I mean, he's just going to take it out, bang, dead. And I'm dead by myself, so no one will know. They will all think he committed suicide. And I want to say, no, I did not commit suicide. This is all racing through my mind when I say to the guy, what could you say? I said, hey, I don't have any money. I just lost my job. I'm broke. And he said, with great depression across his face, he said, I really needed the money. So I figured, what the heck, why? I asked him, what do you need the money for? And he said, he's ready for this? I'm on the lam. I haven't heard anyone say on the lam. I mean, this is definitely a Cagney movie. This is 4 o'clock in the morning. We're seeing one of the great gangster flicks. And so I can't help it. Here I am facing the possibility of this man shooting me. And all I could think of is, on the lam? And I said to him, who are you running from? And he told me, the Russians. Well, this was too good to be true for humor. I said, the Russians? I said, what are they chasing you? Why are they chasing you? And he told me, he said he'd share this with me. This man, the Chicago Cubs cap, was responsible for stopping the Soviet Union's invasion into the United States of America. And I said, well, where were they coming? And he told me, Nebraska. I'm sure you could have guessed it. Nebraska. I said, well, you're doing a great job because as far as I'm concerned, I haven't read of one report of any Soviet citizen going into the state of Nebraska. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll call the governor of Nebraska, and I'm sure he'll give you some money. And the guy said, that's a good idea. I said, great. Why don't you go get a cup of coffee, leave, or what? And then when you come back, I'm sure I'll have an answer for you. So I was feeling a little bit safer when all of a sudden he wheeled and turned to me. I said, oh, that's it, lights out. And he said, oh, by the way, another thing, Coach. I said, what? He said, did you know that there is a major corporation in this country that is advocating homosexuality for all of its employees? I said, no, that slipped by me also. And he said, well, could you do something about it? I said, well, what's the corporation? He said, AT&T. I said, aha, I have a AT&T phone credit card. I can give them a buzz right now. I can solve that. I'll call the governor, call AT&T. We'll get both of those things done. And he said, great, that's great. So I was feeling a little better. And he had one more gem for me. He said, you know why he's broke? I said, no, I did not. And he said, because the NAACP prevented him from having a Major League Baseball career. I said, I cannot allow that. I will give them a call also. I can get all this done before 7:15. I said, we'll solve all the problems. I said, you leave, and when you come back, everything will be taken care of. And he said, thank you very much, and he left. So I breathed a sigh of relief. At least my wife did not have to read in the papers about how her husband committed suicide and tell the children that, Daddy, it's all over. No, so he left, and I immediately called the campus police. And they came about 7:15 or so, and I was talking rather fast. I said, hey, you got to hurry up, got to get outside. There's a guy in a Chicago Cubs cap. He's got khaki pants, work boots. They said, slow down, Coach, slow down. I said, no, you got to get him before he gets away. They said, well, what about him? I said, well, he came to my office this morning, asked me for money. They said, oh, really? Did you give it to him? I said, no. And I said, he's on the lam. He's running. They said, on the lam? And one of the officers said, you know, Coach, you've been under a lot of strain lately. And then I realized that they were going to take me off in the white suits. And luckily, there was a cleaning lady who came in early, and she told them that, yes, indeed, she saw this gentleman running from the campus. And so, thank goodness, they left, and I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I was not going to be in the straitjacket. But anyway, it happens, things like that. I went from the mountain down to the valley. I went from cutting the nets down in a national championship to not only losing my job, but having to deal with this crazed Chicago Cubs fan at 6:30 in the morning on the last day at North Carolina State University. And you know something? I still had to get a little chuckle and a laugh at it. But I did learn one thing. If you ever get fired, don't leave your office door open. A little about my family, I'll tell you. My family was a very important part of my life. I didn't know there was anything but an Italian until I was about 20 years old. Both sets of my grandparents were from Naples, Italy. And I grew up in a family that, well, what can I say? If you know anything about ethnic families, we hugged, we kissed. Kissing? Are you kidding? Kissing. We used to, on Sundays, I'd go over to my grandfather's house, and then all the relatives would come in, and you'd start kissing. When someone came in, you'd kiss. You'd kiss. Then when someone left, you kissed again. You'd kiss. I had chapped lips by the end of the Sunday. You know, one time my mother said, Jim, you just kissed the plumber. Well, how do I know? He came in. I didn't know he was going to fix the pipes. And besides, if he came in, you know he got some spaghetti anyway, because anybody who comes in gets something to eat. My dad was kind of a workaholic. He was, he was the most important male figure in my life. My mom and dad were the most important people in my life. And my dad was really the first one in our family to go to college. And following that, he played professional basketball in the old American League. And until one night on a trip to Utica, New York, my dad had a terrible accident, and in fact, everyone in the car was killed except my dad. And that ended his pro career, but it started him on a career of basketball coaching. And he became a high school coach at St. Nicholas of Tolentine in the Bronx. And from there, the only thing my father ever did that made me ashamed of him is he became a referee. Oh, I can't believe it. I grew up with a referee in my house, but I had to go watch my dad ref, and that's where I learned all the things that I would yell at refs, because I heard them yell at my father. My brother Nick and I would go to Sunnyside Garden underneath the L. That's the elevated subway, for those of you who are not familiar with New York, on Roosevelt Avenue. And my dad would make a call, and they'd all scream and yell at him. Before you know it, I thought his name was Bum for a while, for about 4 years. That's all I heard him called. And sometimes my brother and I would have to agree. He made a bad call, but we never called him a bum. But my dad had a tremendous impact on my life. He had a very simple philosophy about sports. He thought that a kid with a glove in his pocket and a ball in his hand was headed the right direction. And so that's the kind of childhood I had. My life was filled with games and sports and ball and the Yankees. Hey, Yankees. Remember, hey, I grew up in New York at the time. We had the Giants, the Yankees, the hated Dodgers. All right, and the biggest what basketball wasn't our thing. Baseball was. And we used to get in those arguments. Who's better, Mantle, Mays, or the Duke Snyder? Anybody who's grown up during that period knows how heated those arguments can become. We all knew that Mick was the best. And that's when I say I'm talking about 40 Italian kids in my neighborhood in Queens. And we'd go every weekend that the Yankees were in town. And we'd all get together, and we'd go to Yankee Stadium. We'd take the subway. And when I think about it now, going out to Yankee Stadium, I was 9 years old taking subway. The game would start at 1. We'd be there about 9:30. We'd wait about 4 hours for our heroes to walk in. Then we'd go out to right field bleachers and watch them warm up in the bullpen. And I remember being awed by the big Yankee players in pinstripes. And one time I got the courage to lean over and yell at one of the catchers where the ball kept making that thump into his mitt, thump. And these guys were larger than life. And I said, "Hey, catch, does that hurt your hand?" When he had the infamous lines, he looked up at me and said, "Hey, kid, go F yourself." Isn't that great? Big league baseball at its best. I always said to myself then, if I ever was in a position where anybody would want to talk to me, that I would give them the time. And I like the athletes who do that, to be honest with you. But I loved growing up in New York, and I loved my family. And you can imagine what I'm talking about, growing up in this Italian neighborhood. Every Wednesday night, spaghetti. Every Sunday, again, with all the relatives and the tremendous support group. And then my father came in one day and said, "We're moving." And you know what that's like? Any of you out there, you know what it's like when you have to move your family? Well, there it was. Moving where? To Long Island. Long Island? Where is that? What is Long Island? How do you get there? I can't believe it. And so we actually moved. I went from St. Leo's out to Seaford, Long Island. And then there was all different kind of kids there. I never saw so many fair-skinned people. In fact, that's when I met Pamela Susan Levine. Oh, yes. She walked in, and there she was, this blonde-haired, green-eyed creature. I had no idea what it was. And I just fell in love immediately. And it was a great experience. Not only did I meet my future wife, but I also got to play for the first time organized sports. In New York City, you play in the streets. That's it. You go in the streets and you play. You play stickball. Anybody's ever played stickball know what a great game. With a Spalding. Not a Spalding, S-P-A-L-D-I-N-G, a Spalding. That's how you say it. You play on a bounce in the street. Now I'm up into Long Island. They've got uniforms. I never had a uniform in my life, except what I used to wear to St. Leo's. Now you're playing for a grocery store or a gas station or your school. And at Seaford, it was the first time I ever got to play football, basketball, and baseball with a coach, and I loved it. Although we weren't too good. My freshman year in football, we were 0-8. My sophomore year, I want to tell you my football career. My sophomore year, I was on the Pines, a bench warmer. My junior year, I broke my ankle. Thank goodness, I didn't have to play. Then my senior year, I didn't even want to play. And then the coach, Mr. Harry Curtis, came to see me, and he said, I think that you can be a good football player. I don't think you should give it up. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And in fact, after working with me all summer, not only did I play, but I actually became an all Long Island quarterback. And I learned a tremendous lesson there. I saw what people can do, what they can accomplish when someone believes in them. And that's a lesson which I carried with me in my coaching and my personal life for the rest of my life. So I had a great senior year, but when I look back at the whole 4 years as I progressed through high school, I just became more and more of a sports junkie. My sophomore year is when I finally got to play for my dad, which is a heck of an experience, playing for your father. I mean, and most of the kids can play. After the game, they go home. I went home with the coach, and he'd tell me what I did wrong all night long. Then we'd get up for breakfast, and we'd go over it some more. But when I think about it, those sessions, those all-night sessions, really helped me to learn more about the game, which was going to become my profession. Although I did have one tough time. I played on television for the first time, WPIX, Channel 11, the game of the week, the high school game of the week with Marty Glickman. Oh, when you were a kid growing up, those games, that was as big as could be. And we were playing Malvern High School. Terrific team. And I was a sophomore in my normal position, 3 seats down from my dad. I wasn't playing. And all of a sudden, he puts me in the game. Oh, it was magnificent. And I made 3 jumpers from the corner, right? On the tube, I had 6 points. Oh, I mean, I knew I was a ham right then and there. I loved it. I loved being on the tube, and I loved playing. I liked playing for my dad. I was one of those guys who was pretty good at all sports, but didn't get a scholarship offer from anybody. My father had gone to Rutgers University in New Brunswick, and although a lot of people don't realize it, it is a state school. It is the State University of New Jersey, and he said, let's go take a ride up there. And so that's what we did. And we went to see the basketball coach, and I'll tell you what a great campus visit they gave me. They said, look out the window, look to the right, and that's where the dorms were. Look to the left, there's the library. Why don't you go take a walk? That shows you how recruited I was. I was totally unrecruited, but I decided to go to Rutgers anyway, and I remember going out for the freshman basketball team. Wow, I'm telling you something. Here it is, you think you're a pretty good player, and you go out and there's like 120 guys going out for the freshmen. All of them white back then, all of them about 6 foot. And every one of them was all league, all this or all that, except for the 5 recruited players. The 5 kids who were going to get scholarships. The guys who were the kids who they recruited all over the country, and we had 5 of those. The rest of us were, you 5 over here, you other 115 over here, and break up into 3 lines, and that kind of thing. Then they call you by those great names. You, Red Sox, a white shirt. Nobody knows your name. I said, holy cow, I'm never going to make this squad. And I learned right then and there, if you're going to try to reach a goal, you either make yourself indispensable or you make yourself expendable. And when I took a look at a guy who they had, a fellow by the name of Bob Lloyd. Now, Bob Lloyd was a high school All-American. He was handsome, bright, neat, and a great basketball player. And could he score? He went on to be one of the leading scorers in college basketball history. Well, I knew that I wasn't going to shoot better than him. Right then and there, I decided, if I'm going to make this team, I got to do something different. I have to make myself stand out. I have to become indispensable. What I decided was defense. And so starting on the 3rd practice on in a week of tryouts, I'd walk on the court and I'd dive on a loose ball. If there was a loose ball, I'd dive on it. If the ball rack fell over, I'd dive on those balls. I'd take charges on everybody. A kid would come out of the locker room. I'd step in front of him. He'd knock me down. I'd take a charge. I'd dive on anything. The coach whistle would fall to the floor. I'd dive on it. And so finally, who is this guy diving like crazy? He's nuts. All right? But it does get you noticed. And by being noticed and trying to do something, someone once said, greatness is finding a void and filling it. And that was the case here. I was going to play defense. And I actually made the team because of my defensive, I don't know if it's abilities, but the willingness to, bleed. If you're going to bleed, coaches like you when you bleed a lot on the court. And so I made the team. Well, I just kept playing defense and waiting and working. Finally, my opportunity came. I got a chance to start a game because of my defense, but I also scored 29 points in that game, and from that moment on, the middle of my freshman year, I then started every game for the rest of my career at Rutgers, and, that was the first year. So now my sophomore year, I felt I had a good chance to make the varsity and to play. But anyway, I got a chance to start as a sophomore, and we won 12 games, nothing earth-shattering, but the career was on the way. My goal was to play in Madison Square Garden. That was the goal of any New York kid, and I did get an opportunity, but not before we made stops around the country. I learned something very, very important in my career when we played in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Now, I'm from, as I said, Queens, New York, and had never really known prejudice before. And I was getting a hot dog because we were playing Arkansas State. It was a tournament, and we were playing in the second game, and I was getting a hot dog during the first game when a group of people came over and started calling me Dago and Wop and Guinea. And I had never had that kind of an experience, and it really made me understand the ugliness of prejudice and a greater respect for all black Americans who have had to go through an incredible amount of prejudice. The thought I was just being called a Dago. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have to ride in the back of the bus or to not be served in a restaurant. And I've always felt that had a tremendous impact on my coaching career and my desire to help as many minorities as I could and to give as much opportunity and an understanding of the difficulty that most players had to go through coming up in that kind of a system. So I learned a lot playing ball at Rutgers before I reached my dream come true, which was playing in Madison Square Garden. And we did. We finally got there. We played there in the NIT. We got to these won the first two games and lost to a guy named Walt Frazier. May have heard of him, right, for the New York Knicks. But I also got a chance to play one-on-one. Ready for this, folks? We're practicing in Madison Square Garden when all of a sudden Angelo Dundee comes up to me. And if you don't recognize that name, he was the manager of Muhammad Ali. And he said, I watched you play last night. He said, why don't you come and see the champ work out? Muhammad Ali was working out for the Zora Foley fight, and he was practicing in training camp in Madison Square Garden. I said, great. So he invited the whole team. So here I go to watch, right after practice, to watch Muhammad Ali work out. Although prior to this, Muhammad Ali came to our practice, and I played him one-on-one. How do you like that? I played Muhammad Ali one-on-one. He got the ball. He made a move. I said, you walked. He said, no, I didn't. I said, yes, you did. He said, no, I didn't. I said, no, I guess you didn't. I guess I was wrong. When he says he didn't walk, he didn't walk. And now we go. I wasn't going to tell him he wasn't a good basketball player. Well, unbeknownst to me, Angelo Dundee had set it up that the champ would call me up in the ring. And this was at a time when people were talking about Muhammad Ali fighting other athletes from other sports, Jimmy Brown from the Cleveland Browns, or Wilt Chamberlain from the Philadelphia 76ers back then. And so it was in all the papers about who could beat the champ. Could another athlete beat him in another sport? So they set this up that he'd call me up. Then I'd come up, they'd put gloves on me, and I would spar with Ali and knock him out. And then he'd go down, and I'd have pictures in every paper. Basketball player, KO's champ. See? But nobody told me. Nobody told me. So you can imagine, I'm in the back of the room kidding around with my teammates because we had our practice gear on. I'm saying, put me in with him. Put me in with him. I got the Valvano shuffle. I'll kill him. I'll kill him. And I'm all of a sudden I hear from the ring, hey, you out there, you basketball player. And I turned, me? He said, yeah, you. I hear you think you can whoop me, he said. I said, no, I can't. No, I can't. And my teammates carried me up. And I never fought so hard not to go in the ring. And Ali said, look at him. He's so scared. He's going to melt. You could pour him up here. And I didn't go in the ring. Not till later did Angelo Dundee explain to me I would have had the greatest picture in the world. Not to mention one of the great stories for discipline. Could you imagine a player coming in my office? A guy thinks he's tough, and I show him this picture of me knocking the champ down. I say, hey, don't ever get wise with me, kid. But anyway, that whole experience at Rutgers was once again from a freshman year of someone who was a have-not, non-scholarship kid who made the team, to making it as a sophomore, to going and playing in Madison Square Garden for the first time in my life, to go into the semifinals of the NIT, once again showed me that with hard work and desire, determination, and with the belief of other people, your dreams can become reality. And so in 1967, when I graduated from Rutgers, everything looked so great. Blue skies all around. I had overcome a lack of recognition as a high school athlete, not being a recruited athlete, to have a fine career at Rutgers. And then my fondest dream came true. All I wanted to do was be a coach like my dad when Bill Foster, the head coach at Rutgers, offered me the job as the freshman coach at Rutgers for the ungodly sum, was I thrilled, of $5,800. Boy, was I lucky. But whenever you have to make these decisions in your life, and I was offered a job in business. I was offered to play basketball in the AAU program, which was strong back then, for the Akron Goodyears at $10,000. And the most money I was offered was to coach New Brunswick High School, to get my master's degree and coach at New Brunswick High School. A player by the name of Gary Brokaw was there, who was going to be a great player at Notre Dame, then played with Milwaukee Bucks. That was the most money. The least money was $5,800 at Rutgers, and I also was getting married that August and told my wife, here are the three choices. Choice A is the most money, and I'll be home more. B is the second most money. I'll also be home and I'll be learning a career in business. Or C, I'll make no money and I'll never be home. So that's the one I selected naturally, which was a standard operating procedure for the rest of our married life, I think. You know, people have always said about me later on that I was more of a game coach than a practice coach. They said that I made moves in a game, that was my strength. I was not the real technical or tactical guy from practice, but I would be a seat-of-the-pants coach. And really, that all came about because of coaching freshman basketball. Nowadays, assistant coaches just assist the varsity. They don't have their own team. I had my own team from the very first year I coached, but I had it without having game films, without scouting reports, because when you coach a freshman team, you just get the kids and you go play. You play Princeton or Penn or whoever it is in our schedule, St. John's or Fordham. You don't have the benefit of a scouting report. And so what you have to do is you play the first half and you see what the other team does and you see how your team handles it. Then at halftime, you must make adjustments. Then you come out in the second half and try to win the game. That is exactly what helped me later on in my career in terms of making adjustments during games. There are a lot of coaches who are so practice-oriented that when they get in the game, they don't change very much. These are systems coaches, they're called in our profession. People who run a system, and that's it. Come hell or high water, they're never going to change that system. Then there are coaches who are a little bit more going to make an adjustment, and I learned that from coaching the freshman team for 2 years. I also learned a couple other things. My first year, we had 7 guys who were not the most highly recruited players. I won 13 games, went 13-2. My next year, when Rutgers finally put a little more money in the program and we signed players from all over the country, I went 8-7 with all the stars. I found out how important it is to have chemistry. You hear that word all the time. How important it is to have some players who are willing to dive on the floor, to take a charge, to get the loose ball. And I learned that right then and there. And all my career after that, I looked for somebody who may have reminded me of a big-nosed Italian kid from Queens who was willing to find that void and fill it, willing to do what it takes to be effective and to win the particular game. I learned all those lessons about what it takes to win, that the underdog can get it done, and I learned that right from high school and then to my freshman and my playing days at Rutgers, to my coaching the freshman team, to right through my career, I learned the value of those players who maybe had limited ability but had unlimited heart and desire to make the dreams come true. And I remember all those kids who maybe weren't quick enough or big enough, and I would remember what my father told me, and I'd tell them, hey, you can, go get him. There's nobody too big that we can't knock down. And it's such a wonderful remembrance, and I also know it's true in any business, in any profession, and in your personal business life. I mean, if you've got folks who have faith and confidence in you, and you have that in them, there's nothing we can't accomplish. And that's both on the courts, and I'll tell you, academically too, because I want to talk a little bit about that, about academics. Because I talk so much about ball, but academics was always a very important part of my family's life and my life. As I said, my dad was the first to get a college education. My 2 brothers are college graduates. My brother Nick is a successful vice president in a computing company, and he went for his master's degree and then actually went to law school for it. My younger brother Bob, the smartest of all of us, had 1,400 on his college boards. Unfortunately, he went to become a coach too. a mind is a terrible thing to waste. But anyway, academics was important to me. It was important in all of the programs where I worked, at Johns Hopkins, at Bucknell, at Iona. In light of some of the recent things which have come about academics, just about every kid that I coached, except for 2 at those schools, all graduated. And I think that was important. NC State, not the case. It's going to be something I think that has to be looked at and discussed. I think it would be a revelation to a lot of people what happens in college athletics today. But don't think for a second that academics was overlooked either in my personal life or in the kids that I coached. Why? Because just as coaches influenced me as a kid, teachers did too. I majored in English. Why? Because I had great English teachers. One of them in high school, a Mr. McIntyre, was terrific. He'd come in. I thought he was the brightest man I ever met. He knew everything. He read everything. He'd come into class in high school, and I had him in the 11th grade, and he'd write a little couplet or a phrase on the blackboard. And then he would turn and he'd say, would someone care to explain it? And naturally, everyone stick their face down in their book because no one likes English. I've grown accustomed to that. But then I'd always raise my hand and I would give an answer. And he'd say, thank you, Mr. Valvano. Wrong again, but a nice attempt. And it became where every day he'd write something, he'd come in and he'd say, anyone care to explain it? And no one would say anything. He'd say, Mr. Valvano, maybe you would today. And I would. And I'll never forget one. It said, should one's grasp exceed one reach, then what's a heaven for? And I remember trying to explain it, and he said, no, that was wrong again. And I remember using this later on in talking to a reporter, when talking about goals. And I said, as Pope said, should one's grasp exceed one's reach, then what's a heaven for? And that was in the paper, and I got a letter from Mr. McIntyre. This is over 20 years later, and he said, once again, Mr. Valvano, you're wrong. It was Browning who said that, not Pope. You can't ever get away from your English teachers. When I had my tough times the last year and a half, when things were really coming down on me, people would mail me all kinds of poems, and I used to get up every morning and read Kipling's If. And if anybody has some problems, I'll tell you, it's great sometimes to just take the words of others. And Kipling's, if you can keep your head when all those about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. Absolutely wonderful thoughts, and there's so much that you can get from the words of others. It used to get me in trouble sometimes, too. When I was at NC State, I'd be doing a lot of things. I was the athletic director. I was the basketball coach. I had a TV show, a radio show. I'd like to give speeches. And the writers never liked that. And they'd always ask me, why do you do so many things? Why can't you just do one thing? So I would try to explain it in my own words. And when they never accepted, I remember one time decide, that's it, I've had it. I'm just going to let them have it the way Mr. McGinn or Mr. McIntyre would say. And I said, I have to use the words of others. I thought, kind of slowly. I said, why do I do so many things? Because Robert Frost, in his poem, two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and I took the road less traveled by. Or maybe Thoreau in Walden Pond, when he said, some people march to the beat of a different drummer. Or I told him my favorite poem of all time is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And he has the constant refrain in there of, do I dare, do I dare, do I dare ascend the stair with a bald spot in my hair? And so I said, maybe it's a combination of all those things. It's the words of Thoreau, and it's Frost, and it's Eliot. I'm not afraid to take a different road. I may listen to different sounds and follow them, or I'm not afraid to show my bald spots, my vulnerabilities and weaknesses. I thought I did a terrific job. It was the next day I picked up the paper. One of the writers said, after talking to Coach Valvano last night about why he does more than one thing, he said he's worried about growing bald. Enough said about my dealings with the press. Oh, I'll tell you, as Professor McGinn would have said, et tu, Brute? Let me get one thing straight right now. The difference between playing the game and coaching the game of basketball. Playing is a piece of cake. Playing is put your sneaks on, answering the introduction, run out, everybody cheers and claps, and you go out and you do the best you can. And there's thing that people don't realize, I think a lot of fans don't realize, the reason the players look depressed after a game if they lost is because the coach makes them depressed. You see, we tell them that, I want to see any smiles on that bus. Get your head up, but no smiles. All right, because the difference between playing and coaching is it's got nothing to do with each other. If a player scores 40 points and they lose by 1, I guarantee you that player's happy. He's feeling pretty good. He's not happy they lost. Don't get me wrong. Nobody wants to lose. But if you can have a great performance individually, you'll do what the coach says. You'll keep your mouth shut on the bus, and you'll be a little bit quiet. But down deep, you can't wait to get on the phone and call mom, dad, your girlfriend, everybody else. I had 40 big ones tonight. That's not what coaching is. Coaching, you win or you lose. That's it. And if you don't win, nobody's ever said, hey, Jim, you coached a whale of a ball game last night. It's a W or an L. And that's the difference between the coach and the player. It's why probably so many players who say, you know something, I think I'd like to be a coach. And then when they do it for a while, they say, hey, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I want at all. Well, I learned all of those things in my first 2 years. I saw the difference between playing and coaching right away. Remember I talked about playing my first game ever in Rutgers when I came off the bench and had 29 points. I didn't tell you whether we won or lost that game. You know why? I don't even remember whether I won or lost. I just know I played a heck of a game. But I can tell you the first game I ever coached, I coached Rutgers freshmen against the Penn freshmen. Penn was coached by Digger Phelps, presently the coach of Notre Dame. We won 99-96. I'll never forget that one. I also remember the second year we played Penn in the Palestra, and they beat us by 30 points. I know I felt better the first year than the second year. I also remember my first year, everything went right. I remember a kid named Bobby Carr. We're playing Lehigh. We're down by a point. Seconds remaining. We throw the ball a half court. Bobby Carr turns around and throws it and banks it in at the buzzer, and we win. I'm a genius. As they say, what was that play, coach? Oh, that's the old bank it off the board from half court play. You're a genius. I also know the second year, everything went wrong. My second year. I enjoyed my first year better. My second year, we played Army up at Army. I'll never forget giving a great Newt Rockne pep talk in the locker room. Oh, I was the best. And then I said, let's go get them, guys. And we ran out. One problem. We're in the wrong gym. I took my team to the wrong gym. There was nobody out there. I said, we should have played. We would have done better. Because when we found the right gym, we lost by about 18 points. But I just saw the difference between playing and coaching. And needless to say, playing was a joy. Coaching was a labor. A labor of love, but certainly a labor. Because you didn't get paid too much. I told you, I got $5,800 my first year at Rutgers. Well, I did such a good job. My second year, they gave me $6,100, whether I needed it or not. Hey, my wife was pregnant with my first child, and I said, I'm going to have to get myself a job where I can make some money. So I went into the job market. And Al Twitchell, who was the athletic director at Rutgers, had a very good friend of his named Marshall Turner, who was the athletic director at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Better known for its lacrosse, but looking for a basketball coach. So Mr. Twitchell said, Jim, if you're interested, I can get you an interview. I said, yeah, I'm interested, certainly. This was Division III, which certainly is not the highest level. It's the lowest, as a matter of fact, but I needed the bread. So I went for my first job interview of my life. And being innovative, remember now, I'm making about, I was going to get about $6,500 starting my third year. And so I made pieces of paper. I put in one pocket, $7,000. I put in another pocket a piece of paper that said $7,500. I had another pocket that said $8,000. And a fourth pocket said $8,500. And you see what I was going to do, folks? Is I was going to go in, and if Marshall Turner said, I can only pay you $7,000, I'd say, Mr. Turner, before I left home today, I wrote on a piece of paper a figure that I could not come for less than this figure. And then I'd pull out the $7,500. See, now if he said $8,000, I'd go to the $8,500. I'm pretty sure enough, folks. Well, here I am meeting with Mr. Turner, and he offers me $10,000. I mean, my eyes bugged out of my head. I had no 10-5 card. And since my eyes were in my plate, Mr. Turner said, I assume that you're satisfied. I satisfied? Are you kidding? I was thrilled. So I took the job. I got double figures. I was into dubs. $10,000 a year. And so we made the trek. Pam, my daughter-to-be, Nicole, and I went to Baltimore, Maryland to coach at Johns Hopkins University. Now, when I took the job, I guess I didn't read the fine line. I thought I was going to be the head basketball coach, which is what I was. But I also, when I got there, found out I was going to be an assistant football coach. I was going to teach gym classes. Right? I mean, I did it all. I also coached baseball at Johns Hopkins University. We were 0-8, as a matter of fact. That was the extent of my baseball. I made one major decision. You ever wonder when the manager goes out to the mound, how he knows whether to take the pitcher out or not? Well, I went through that once. We were actually winning a game, beating Navy, 3-0, bottom of the ninth, at Annapolis. My pitcher, Alan Schreiber, never forget Alan, from Long Island. And Alan was pitching a great game, shut up, but the bases were loaded with 2 out. And I walked out, sauntered out to the mound, like Casey Stengel, said to my catcher, "What do you think? Does the kid got any more stuff?" The catcher said, "He never did have any stuff." I said, "Should we leave him in?" He said, "Well, we could bring in the right fielder because that's the way he was. We didn't have exactly a bullpen." I said, "Alan, how do you feel?" He says, "I can do it, Coach." I wanted to take him out, and I thought, nah, what would Casey do? I left him in, walked back to the bench, turned around, next pitch, grand slam, home run. We lost 4-3. I don't know what Alan Schreiber's doing. That was the last time I ever coached baseball. But in coaching baseball, teaching gym classes, coaching football, to be honest with you, just to learn how to do all those things all helped me in my career as a basketball coach. When do you know it's time to leave? Well, let me put it this way. We had the first winning season there, I think, since the French and Indian War. We did turn it around in 1 year, but I remember after we won our first 3 games, we were going to a game. In fact, we played Gettysburg at Gettysburg. It was the second game of the season, and we won. And on the bus ride home, I saw all the players in the back of the bus talking, and they called me back. And I said, "Yeah, what's going on, fellas?" And they said, "We were discussing something." I said, "What?" They said, "You." I said, "Discussing me? What about me?" They said, "Why is winning so important to you?" When these kids were great kids and very much the intellectuals, but when they're asking you why winning's important, I'm not so sure you're going to be at a place you want to be forever. But I got a call from a friend of mine by the name of Dick Stewart, who was an assistant coach at the University of Connecticut to a man I had never met by the name of D. Rowe. And he said that D was looking for an assistant because Dick was leaving, as was Fred Barakat, who was his other assistant, and Fred became the head coach at Fairfield University. And he said, "D's a special guy. I'd like you to come up and interview with him." Now, Dick Stewart was a young man I had played college ball with at Rutgers, and later on would become my assistant at NC State. So I went up to interview with D. Rowe. And D. Rowe is a gentleman who is of that school where the game is like life itself. And it's a microcosm of life. And he's a wonderful man. He's got 7 children. And it was just like being back home around a big Italian family. I went to dinner the night of my interview, and I'll never forget his wife, Ginny, in the kitchen. Dee had forgot to tell her that I was coming over. And I guess when you have 7 kids, having pork chops that night, 2 chops per person, babe. I mean, you're looking at, 9 people had 18 chops. Somebody was not going to get a chop if I was going to eat. And I heard them arguing in the kitchen. And I was wondering whether D would give up his chop for me or not. But it was terrific, and I loved D. He was also the best of any coach who I ever met who was able to juggle that concept that while a kid is playing for those 40 minutes, it should be the most important thing in the world because that's what he's doing. Yet when it's over, to understand how relatively unimportant it was. And I loved D and I loved his family, so I took the job. And I've gone up to Storrs, Connecticut, and I got a chance now in the development of my own career to recruit. And I got on the road, and I'll never forget one of my first experiences on the road. I was going to see a kid in Jersey, and who should come into the parking lot at the same time? Dick Vitale. That's right. Those of you who only know Dick as the announcer of college basketball brings tremendous enthusiasm to the game may not realize he was an assistant coach where? At my alma mater, Rutgers. And he was one of the best recruiters in the country. And I'll never forget getting into the parking lot at the same time, and Dick had his lovely wife, Lorraine, with him, and their youngest daughter, Tracy. And Tracy did not have a spoon. She needed to eat her baby food. And so I said, well, I could see it was a problem, but I had to go see this kid. And Dick said, no, wait a second. Dick said it was very important that the baby have a spoon, and he had the first meeting. I said, I thought I did. He said, no, he did. He said, go get the spoon. You got to get the spoon. He says, you have a child, don't you? I said, yeah. He says, the baby's got to eat. It's got to eat. And before you know it, I'm off finding a spoon for Tracy. Dick Vitale is in recruiting the kid. Yep, I got the spoon. You might call it something else. Dick got the player. But that was Dick Vitale. He was one of the best recruiters in college basketball, and he does so much, I think, to bring college basketball an enthusiasm level that no one else has ever done.
All aboard, Valvano roared, old number one is due. Our cardiac contraption with a 5-man Wolfpack crew. We'll huff and puff and strut our stuff and race the hands of time. Oh, how sweet to have a seat aboard the Wolfpack line. Hardward hearts are bouncing up the Wolfpack track. A cardiac contraption brought the Wolfpack back.
Okay, after Pam and I were married in August after my senior year at Rutgers, my resume was kind of getting crowded here. I had 3 jobs, 2 daughters, and an empty wallet. In fact, as I look back on it, it's amazing. My years at Rutgers, 2 years, I never got out of the $5,000 to $6,000 range. I went to Hopkins for that huge $10,000 figure, and still, I knew that after Connecticut, where I hit 13,000, looking at it, say, this is going to be a long time before I can reach my age here. And so it was time to move again. And I was itching to become a head coach. I think I had served my apprenticeship. I'd been a freshman coach for a couple of years. I was a head coach of a Division III program, and I was the first assistant in the Division I program. I thought I had the experience necessary to finally run my own program. And a job opened up at Bucknell University, which was a Division I program. And so I applied for the job, got all my friends to call. Bill Foster was my first coach, D. Rowe, and the AD was Bob Latour. Unfortunately, I applied after the application deadline. And I've learned something about college basketball. I know it's true of every business, but the bigger the job, the fewer people you have to speak to. I mean, when NC State later on, it's determined by one person. But you get a job like a Bucknell, where it is Division I, but it's not quite the highest level. You got to talk to everybody. I mean, you go in, you talk to the AD, the director of admissions, the financial aid people, the guidance counselors, you name it, residence halls, everybody you talk to. And this was no exception. Well, I was going through an entire day of these interviews, and finally I'm talking to the provost, who is the academic dean, at most universities, and his name is Wendell Smith at Bucknell. And he's not listening to me. He's looking at me kind of funny. And finally he said, "That's it. I know who you look like." I said, "Who?" He said, "Joe Namath." So here I am trying to get a job, and the guy says, "You look like Joe Namath." And I just said off the top of my head, and it became a standard reply, as a lot of people since that time think that I resemble the great quarterback from the Jets. I said, "Well, you know the difference between me and Joe Namath?" He said, "What?" I said, "When you're making what Namath makes, they say you're ruggedly handsome. When you make what I make, they say you got a big nose." And I don't know if that got me the job or not, but he laughed, and I wound up getting the job at Bucknell, and was way up now in about the $14,000 range. And it was a great job for me because it was a Division I job. But I also knew I had to get some more money. And so I started to speak at camps. I became the camp man. All of these things were important in my development as a basketball coach, because communication is extremely important. Well, I used to work at camps in the Pocono Mountains, and I'd work for a week and make about $125. And there'd always be these speakers who would come in, and they'd make $100 to $125 a day. And here I am working all week. Well, one day I was working at the Pocono Invitational Basketball Camp run by a gentleman named Bob Kennedy, when the speaker who was supposed to be there couldn't make it. And so they didn't have a speaker, and they had like 800 kids. And I said, "Hey, let me speak." And he said, "I don't know. I'll do it for free." Everybody likes that. And so he said, "Go out there." And I gave the first speech that I ever gave to any group. And this was my first year at Bucknell, and here I am up in the Poconos, and it had all been building up. All of the things that I learned, I think, as a high school player, and then at Rutgers University, the concept of being a have-not and making it, of overcoming adversity, of setting goals, all was inside of me. And without any script, I just stood in front of these 800 basketball-playing kids, and the first thing all I could think of was to tell them to stand up and be excited and give it. They didn't know what I was talking about. And so I said, well, sit down. Let me explain this to you. I said, there are two kinds of people who come to camps. There are big timers, and then there are rats. And if you're a rat is a kid who takes a charge, who dives on the floor, just like I did when I was at Rutgers. I said, a big timer is the kind of kid who comes and he's color coordinated, his shirt and his shorts and his sneakers, or it's a big timer can also be a coach. And I said, and a rat is someone who will take a charge. So what I want you to do the rest of this week is start taking charges in games. Then I want you to take a charge on the laundry truck when it comes in the morning. Take a charge on, and I came up with this concept, whoever would take a charge on the camp director, I would send them a shirt. And so the rest of that week, the poor camp director, he'd come out of a cabin, and there'd be 3 little kids there, and he'd fall down. And I went to speak at another camp, and it just spread throughout the whole summer. I used to live in the Pocono Mountains and just speak at camps. And one of the camps actually went and got a stuffed rat. They put it on a skateboard for me, and the rat was in the stance of a defensive stance, if you can picture, with its paws out, and it said on it, the rat people take the charge. And so I made shirts that were called Super Rat shirts. And so I would give a Super Rat shirt to any kid that the camp director would tell me was a super rat, a kid who would hustle and work hard. And I had the most wonderful summer. I spoke at 90 camps. But all of those experiences, just let me believe again how valuable being enthusiastic would be. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, nothing great has ever been accomplished without enthusiasm. And the enthusiasm of the campers, of the coaches there, helped me in my first job. Not to mention that, listen to this, $9,000 I made that summer. Of course, I was never home, but I had a wonderful summer, and I was ready for my first year of coaching at Bucknell University. And let me tell you, was that an experience? I needed all the enthusiasm I could get. I needed to be a rat because it was tough. They won 5 games the year before, and I had, that was the bad news. The good news, as one of the guys on the committee who hired me said, in fact, I'm wrong. They won 1 game the year before. They won 1 game the year before. And the guy on the committee said to me, but don't worry about it, Coach. I said, why? He said, you got everybody back. This was the year that Syracuse was loaded. They were in the top 10. It was the team that 2 years later went to the Final Four. And I'll never forget playing up at Syracuse. And before the game, you talk like all coaches talk. I'm ready. We're ready. We're excited. We're going to get it done. We went out, and the opening tap, boom, they got it, dunk, boom. They pressed us, stole the ball, dunk, boom. I called timeout. Came over. We said, relax, guys. Well, we're all right. We're all right. All right. Went out again. They stole it again, dunk. We couldn't get the ball in bounds. Now my player called timeout. I said, what are you guys doing back here for? I have nothing else to say. Not that much. Well, we were down by 56 points. Can you imagine that? I lost the game 110 to 53. I'll never forget that, because could you imagine if someone had come down the locker room that day and said to me, Coach, 10 years from tonight, you're going to win a national championship. I'd have said, in what particular sport? It's not going to be this one, I'll tell you that. But those are the things I remember so vividly about my time at Bucknell is, 3 years later, we turned it around. We had the first winning season in decades there. We made the playoffs, and I was excited, but I also knew that there might be some other things out there, because Bucknell was Division I, but it wasn't the highest level of Division I. It was time to make the next step in my career. After my 3-year stint at Bucknell, I got a phone call from Tom Costello and Bill Madden, 2 friends of mine from New York. Tommy wanted to know if there was anyone I could recommend for a job opening in New York. And I said, where? And he said, Iona College. And I said, Iona College? And I thought about it, and I knew Iona. Iona was a small Catholic school up in New Rochelle, New York. And I said, well, what about me? And he said, you? Well, I didn't think you'd be interested. I said, why not? And he said, well, I don't know. So I said, what about me? He says, hey, that'd be great. He said, you're going to love the president of Iona, John Driscoll. He said, he makes the whole thing go. He's dynamic. And I said, well, I'd like to come for an interview. And so I went to Iona and fell in love with the school. 45 minutes from Broadway, but more importantly, it is in New York, where I started my career and where I still always wanted to get back to coach and maybe coach at Madison Square Garden. Now, I'll tell you, every job has its problems. Think about this one. Iona College. I remember the first home I ever went into. I went to the youngsters, said, Jim Valvano, Iona College. Kid said, hey, Ma, the guy owns his own school. I said, oh, no, I don't own it. That's the name. I own a college. But anyway, it's more than just a one-liner waiting to happen. Iona College was a school looking for an identity with a man. If leadership is just, it's having vision and then being able to have others share that vision and make that vision a reality, well, this is where I needed to be, because when I came for the interview, Brother John Driscoll, the president of this Irish Christian Brothers School, told me that he felt that Iona being a commuter school, where the kids would go to school all day and then go home, they had no reason to come back. Iona also being a school of first-generation college students. Well, Driscoll felt there was no identity. There was nothing that they could really hang their hat on and be proud of. And he felt that a basketball team, could get that done, that it could make a presence in the New York area. And he told me about how he used to sneak into Madison Square Garden as a kid. Now he never wanted to sneak in again. He wanted to go in the front door. And so I accepted the job, and I came to Iona College and moved up to Westchester County and got a chance to dream. In fact, we dreamed so much. Brother Driscoll and I, we coined a phrase called Dare to Dream. And that's what we were going to dare the kids at Iona College, who I was going to recruit, to dream, with the goal being, the first youngster I went to recruit, I told him, the goal was going to be to play in the 9 o'clock game in Madison Square Garden. So that became my recruiting pitch to the youngsters. You're going to come here, build a program. We're going to play the 9 o'clock game in the Garden. We're going to create an identity for this college. It's going to be absolutely great. And that's what we tried to do. And the recruiting was tough. I remember one of the first recruits I got was a kid named Cedric Cannon from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Now, you hear about all kinds of recruiting stories. You have to do some crazy things. When I recruited and you go in the home, they usually feed you. Well, now I was very much involved in the recruiting of minority students. And yep, I was in with the black athlete. And Cedric Cannon went in the house, and his mother gave me chitlins. Now, I hadn't had chitlins before. I loved them, but I had as many chitlins as I could get a hold of. Then his mother put on some music, and she said, you want to dance? And now I'm in home, and I'm dancing with Mrs. Cannon, and I'm trying to tell a kid, we're going to play in a 9 o'clock game. We're going to dance our way into the Garden. And the music's playing, and I'm having a great time, and all of a sudden someone comes up to me and says, Uncle Calvin wants to talk to you. Sure, put Uncle Calvin on the line. Get on the line. And he says, Jim, he said, I understand Cedric has committed to you. I said, yes, and he made a fine choice. It's a fine school. He says, well, I want to make sure that you're going to take care of him. He says, I know a little something about it. I said, really, Uncle Calvin, you do? So don't worry about it. I'll take care of him. And he said, well, I played in college. I said, did you? Where'd you play? He said, Niagara. I said, oh, yeah, fine school. I know Frank Layden. He's the coach up there. I said, what's your name? He said, Calvin Murphy. I said, oh, that Uncle Calvin. He's the star for the Houston Rockets, and he's an all-pro, and he'd be a Hall of Famer. But I went back to dancing after that. Cedric Cannon came, as did a bunch of other players. And that first year, we had great recruiting, but it was tough on the court. I had a guy who I hired by the name of Tommy Abatamarco. He was known as the Alphabet Man. You can see why. You try and spell the name Abatamarco. Or the A-Man, or the T-Man, they called him. He was one of the best recruiters, I think, in college basketball. He's at the University of Colorado today. And we recruited a young man by the name of Glenn Vickers, and he was our obsession. He was a 6', 3-inch All-American player. And what I said, All-American. Here's at a school where we were drawing 200 people to games. We set our sights on one of the best players in the country. We went to every single game he played. Never missed a game. In fact, we went to every practice. The coach, Roy Coble, said that they couldn't start until they saw an Iona coach come in. We were there in a snowstorm. It took us about 4 hours to get there. And we got there right at the end of practice, and the whole team stopped and looked. In came Tom Abatamarco, the Alphabet Man, and the crazy Italian Valvano into a practice in Babylon in the snow to watch Glenn just take some shots at the end of practice. We said, we want you. Who else was going to do that? Well, we did get him, and he was a great player for us, but he helped us get some other great players. Jeff Rulin came the next year. Jeff Rulin was the 6'10 high school All-American from Sachem High School out in Lake Ronkonkoma, Long Island. And Jeff was recruited by all the bigs: North Carolina, Kentucky, Notre Dame, Indiana, Maryland, and Iona. Yep, we fit right in there, right, folks? Well, that's how it was. And it came down to between Kentucky and Iona. And the Kentucky people couldn't believe it. Just as we'd go to every game, so did Kentucky. But they used to fly in Lear jets. And they'd come in. And we knew all of them. And when it got towards the end, one of the Kentucky alums said, I can't believe it. It's between Iona and Kentucky. So that's right. He said, I'll tell you what, Coach. He said, if Jeffrey wants to go to your school, we'll buy your school and we'll move it to Lexington. I mean, being a Catholic school, it'd make us an offer. You never can tell. We might want to move it down there. But Jeffrey didn't go to Kentucky. He came to Iona. Glenn Vickers and Jeff Rulin helped attract other fine players. And I think before too long, we felt we were going to get that game in the Garden. And we did. You know how I got a game in the Garden? I got a game in the Garden by badgering the people of the Garden. I'd go down once a week and say, you got to have us in. Got to have us in. Now I said, look who we have. We have great talent. And we got in. It was a triple header. What I didn't know is it was supposed to only be a double header. And so they put our game on at noon. It wasn't 9 o'clock, but it was noon. We played South Florida. I remember telling the writers that it's going to be a defensive struggle because we might be a little nervous. It was 107 to 100. That's what happened. And we won, and I wound up in Chinatown after the game. My first win as a coach in the Garden, and it was great. It wasn't to be my last, but it wasn't 9 o'clock. To do that, we needed a couple of more years. And another guy who I got to help us out as an assistant was a fellow by the name of Kenny Williamson. I mentioned Kenny because it was a significant development in my career. I am, as I said, James Thomas Anthony Valvano from an Italian neighborhood, then Long Island, and that's where I recruited mostly. Well, Kenny Williamson is known as the Eggman. He's from Harlem. And with the Eggman, the reason he's called that is he used to deliver eggs to his grandmother as a child each day in Harlem for breakfast. And they'd call him the Eggman or Eggy. Well, Eggy showed me how to recruit in the inner city. He showed me how different it was to recruit a black family in Harlem than another family, a white family in the suburbs of Long Island. And this was extremely important to me. He also showed me how ridiculous it is to try and tell a black family what it's like to go to school at a predominantly white campus. That's crazy. Just like no one could tell me what it's like to grow up in an all-Italian neighborhood. I did it. I know it. And so my whole recruiting pitch became differently as I grew and broadened my own perspective and understanding of people. And Kenny would take me to Harlem, and everybody would say, hey, Kenny, how you doing? Whenever you're in Harlem, you see a white guy with a black guy walking, you think it's a narcotics crew. You know, they thought we were cops. Either cops or, as we got there more often, cops or basketball coaches. And Kenny was delightful, brought me in the home, and he showed me how to be able to tell the families how important it was for education. And that we weren't going to give you anything, but we were going to give you the opportunity. And this was something which is funny because later on in my career, I became criticized for saying things that it's not the coach's job to get an education, it's this athlete's job, it's the student's job. That was straight from Kenny Williamson, who told me you should never promise you're going to do something for someone. You've got to give them the opportunity. All this was starting to put together a program where I could play in that 9 o'clock game in Madison Square Garden. And finally, what happened was I saw an article in the paper that said that Sonny Werblin, the man who ran Madison Square Garden, who made Joe Namath Broadway Joe when he signed him for $400,000 to play for the Jets. There was an article in the paper. It said, Sonny Werblin wants to bring big-time college basketball doubleheaders back to the Garden. And then it listed all the teams that were going to be playing there, and we weren't in it. And I looked at it, I said, we're the best team in New York. They've got to have us. So I saw that Sonny was going to be at a party in New York, and I crashed it. I got myself dressed up, went down, had the newspaper, and I walked right up to him at the party and said, Mr. Werblin, I'm Jim Valvano from Iona College, just hoping he wouldn't say, oh, a young man like you owns a college? But he didn't. And he said, yeah, I'm familiar with your team. And I said, well, obviously not too familiar. I'm here to answer your ad. He said, what ad? I said, the ad here in the paper. He said, what are you talking about? I said, it says here you want to have big-time college basketball in Madison Square Garden. Well, we're the biggest team in New York, and you don't have us. And he said, he couldn't believe my chutzpah to come and do that. He started to laugh. And I said, I've been trying to get a game in the Garden my whole time here at Iona. And I said, and you've got to let us in. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, you call my secretary tomorrow. And I went back and called the next day, and true to his word, secretary gave me an appointment about a week later, and I went to Madison Square Garden to see Sonny Werblin. And I was all excited to sell him my dream and my vision. And I got there, it was great, in the Garden, waiting to meet him. And then we went into the office, and he said he's sorry he was late, but he was with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, making arrangements for the circus. And I know it was a dumb thing, and I said, but I asked him, how'd the elephants get in? How do you know how they got in the Garden? And he told me, and then he said, okay, now, what can I do for you? And I said again, Mr. Werblin, we need to play in the Garden. We have the best player in the city, and Jeff Rulin. We have the best team in the city, and we're not playing. And I said, I need to play. And he said, calm down. And he called somebody, and he said, I think we can get you a game. I said, no, not just any game. He said, what? I said, it's got to be against a national power, and it has to be at 9 o'clock. We're not playing at 7. We're playing the 9 o'clock game. He looked at me again. I mean, here's a guy, we have no games in the Garden. The last time we played was at noon on a triple header. And I said, 9 o'clock? And so he said, well, we'll see what he can do. And I said, it's got to be 9. By the time I got back to the office, there was a message to call back. I called back. Not only did we have one, we had 2 games. 9 o'clock in the Garden. He wasn't sure who the opponents would be, but he said, to make sure I knew, it would be against national powers. We got the 2 games. One was against Kansas, and one was against Louisville. The Kansas game we won, but the Louisville game in late February, in my 5th year at Iona, the Louisville game, Louisville was ranked number 2 in America. Louisville would go on to win the national championship that year. And it's 9 o'clock, and I'll never forget, in the locker room, telling my kids that I'm the same guy who tried to play football at Seaford High School, and people didn't think I could, but somebody thought I could, and I did. The same guy who had to dive on the floor for loose balls at Rutgers in order to make that team, but then 4 years later was a co-captain and playing in the 9 o'clock game in the Garden. The same guy who coached at Johns Hopkins and Bucknell and was an assistant at Connecticut. In every place I had seen where things can happen and where dreams can become reality. I said, my whole life I've wanted to coach in the 9 o'clock game. And I said, and tonight we're going to play a national power. And I couldn't go on. I actually started to cry. It was one of the 2 times in the locker room giving a pregame talk that I started to cry. And the kids just got up and bolted out. And I'll never forget it. With 3 minutes to play in the game, packed house, not a seat in the Garden. It was sold out, which had only happened one other time. That was when Fordham played Notre Dame. And the score, with about 3 minutes to play, we're up by about 15. And the Garden stood up as one and gave this team from Iona a standing ovation. And we won 77-60 with Jeff Rulin making a dunk to end the game. And, dreams can become a reality. And I remember, I wound up in Chinatown again that night, explaining how we won to 4 guys over chop suey, I think. But I also knew, when I got home, I said to my wife, you better pack again, because I think we might be going someplace else. And it was truly one of the great wins, but also, again, just reaffirmed to me that you can accomplish great things if you believe.
Well, listen to me, Mr. Big Shots. My
when I said to my wife, let's pack, obviously I didn't know for sure, but when you win a game of that magnitude, you just know in any profession, especially coaching, jobs open up at the end of the year, and I just felt this was my 5th year at Iona. We had turned the program from one where a couple of hundred people came to games to filling Madison Square Garden. We won 29 games my last year, and what else can you accomplish? You see, you got to look at those the things you want to do in your lifetime. That year, we went to the NCAA tournament for our 2nd year in a row. We beat Holy Cross in the first round. Then we played and lost to Georgetown. It became a nemesis, to me. Georgetown. We played the Hoyas in Providence. I thought we could win the whole thing that year, but we lost. But we had a great year, and I had a great 5 years at Iona. Iona was terrific to me. The brothers at Iona were true to their word. Jeff Ruland and Vickers and Hamilton and the players I had were wonderful. They treated me very, very well at Iona, and always, financially and personally. And then I got a phone call one day from North Carolina State University, and it was a Miss Royleen Thompson, and she said, Mr. Willis Casey would like to speak to you. Now, I knew Willis Casey was the athletic director at NC State, and again, these are the calls. Remember I said before, the smaller the job, the more people you tend to have to talk to. This is NC State in the Atlantic Coast Conference, one of the best jobs in America. Mr. Casey gets on the phone and says, Jim? I said, yes. He said, had a great year. I said, thank you. He said, how'd you like to come down for an interview? I said, yeah, I think I would. He said, fine, here's Royleen. That was it. Where was the small talk? Aren't you just talking about the weather or something? And I got back on Royleen. She said, there's a plane leaving LaGuardia tomorrow at such a time. She didn't quite say be on it, but it was kind of like that. And I said, okay, I'll be there. And then I went down for an interview with North Carolina State University, and it was an amazing thing, because Willis Casey, as I was to find out, is without question one of the brightest athletic directors I had ever been around. Normally when you go for an interview, you don't start talking money and contract and all that initially. You expect to come back a second time and talk about that. So I recall being in the meeting and Willis Casey saying to me, what kind of a contract you're looking for? And I'm saying, contract's not important to me. I just want the opportunity. And he said, and how about money? I said, money's not important to me. Just want the opportunity. Well, that's what I said, and he believed me. But I expected to come back a second time. But I didn't have to come back a second time. After the interview, about a week later, Willis Casey calls me, and I was in New York at the time at a restaurant. Talked to my wife. My wife told him where I was, and he called there, and he said, Jim, we'd like to make you the basketball coach at North Carolina State. And I said, but, he said, well, what's that? You said you wanted the job. I said, yeah, but what about a contract? He said, you said a contract wasn't important. I said, but how about the salary? He said, you said the salary wasn't important, you just wanted the opportunity. Well, I'm giving the opportunity. And so I said, this can't be. So I remember saying, well, my wife hasn't seen the school yet, my wife hasn't seen the area, and he said to me, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a press conference to announce the new basketball coach at North Carolina State University. It's either going to be you or it's going to be our second choice. Wow. And he hung up. Oh, is that a great negotiator? So I sat there with, the phone hung up. I said, I don't know what to do. And I'm in New York, and he said I had till 11 o'clock that night to tell him. So I was with Bill Madden, my friend and lawyer, who helped bring me to Iona, and he knew better than everybody, better than most, how Iona had treated me so well. I mean, they were just terrific to me. In fact, Iona, my salary was excellent. I was the athletic director. They had purchased a house for me in New Rochelle that I lived in free of charge, car, everything else, and it was a wonderful place, and we were winning. 23 wins my 4th year, 29 wins my 5th year. I had everybody back. It was wonderful. And so I made another one of those decisions like I did earlier. I called my wife back, and she said, what did Willis Casey want? I said, Pam, he offered me the job. She said, really? I said, yeah. She said, we're not moving again, are we? I said, well, I don't know. I have to tell him by tonight, 11 o'clock. She said, how long's the contract? I said, well, I don't have a contract. She said, well, how much money is it? I said, well, there isn't any money involved. She said, oh, I get it. She said, you're going to leave a place that loves you, where you have a 10-year contract, where you're making a lot of money, and you're going to go to a place without a contract, and you have no idea how much money you get. And I said, well, it seems to be it. She said, you can't do that. But she knew, as well as I knew, that, hey, the ACC was calling, a chance to ply my trade at the highest level of the sport. And I said, Pam, we're going. from New York, and I thought I knew about the big time. But I'll tell you, I didn't know about the college basketball big time until I went to that first press conference at North Carolina State. This is down Tobacco Road, and back then in 1980, when I took the job at NC State, there were no professional sports in the state of North Carolina. Of course, now they have the Charlotte Hornets in basketball. Back then, college hoops was what it was all about. And the press conference, I'd never seen so many members of the media and TV and radio. And yep, I loved it. I enjoyed it. And right away they tried to make a kind of this competition between Dean Smith, the coach at North Carolina, and I, Dean, who has been there so many years and so successful. They said to me, "Coach, how do you expect to beat Dean?" I said, "I don't expect to beat him. I expect to outlive him." That didn't prove to be correct either. But it was a wonderful meeting and a great press conference. And when it was over, the head of our booster club, Mr. Charlie Bryant, said to me, "Jim," he said, "we're happy with you, but we know you." He said, "You've got to get out and speak to our members." And I said, I didn't know what he really was talking about. He told me that they have a booster club called the Wolfpack Club at NC State. In fact, they have over 13,000 members of the booster club, and they give about $5 to $6 million a year to support our athletic department. And you got to understand now, the NC State Wolfpack in the state of North Carolina, this is an important thing to a lot of families. And so the booster club, there are 100 counties in the state, and in each county, there's a county chairman. They have 25 meetings a year. And Charlie told me that it was very important that I go to this first meeting and that I'm good. He said, "Now, we like you." He says, we like you. We've met you. He said, "We think you're a heck of a coach." And he said, "But we need to let the people know that you can inspire and motivate and lead us to another national champion." I said, "I'm ready. I'm ready." And he said, "Okay, first speech I had to give was in Greenville, North Carolina." And so I was dressed in kind of like the suit that I had on, and he said, "No, you can't go that way." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You got to learn a lot about the South and a lot about North Carolina State." And he said, "Number one, colors are important. We're the red and white, and you've got to wear a red coat." And I said, "I don't have a red coat." He said, "No problem." He gave me my first official red Wolfpack basketball coat. And let me tell you about this coat. The material was kind of like, well, steel wool. You know, they call it permanent press, but it's not. It's steel wool. You get hit by a truck, and you can brush it off, and just keep going. It's not going to wrinkle. And it had the lapels. Picture those wide lapels, really wide jobbers, right? And I said, "Oh, this is a nice number." And I put it on. And he said, "Now, another thing." He said, "You got to wear a school tie." He said, "With a Wolfpack, we have a wolf tie." So I said, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I've seen other schools that have school ties. I assumed it'd have little tiny wolves on it. And you'd have to get up real close, and you'd say, 'Oh, you're an NC State man. I can see by the wolves.'" This tie had 3 wolves on it. I mean, the size of three huge wolves on. Let me tell you how big the wolves are. You could be 50 yards away, and you can read NC State on the hats that the wolves are wearing that are on your tie. That's how big it is. Let me tell you the style of the tie. If you wear the tie, you don't have to wear a shirt. You understand what I'm saying? This is a wide body tie. So now I got the red coat with the wide lapels. I got the Wolfpack tie on it with the wolves showing, and also the knot. You see, the material's so thick that no matter how tight you pull it, it makes the knot the size of your fist around your throat, makes your collar go up like the flying nun. So now I'm ready. And he says, "Not yet." I said, "What now?" He said, "You got to understand about pants. See, now I love the South. I lived there for 10 years now, but you got to understand there are regional differences. And there's no place like the South. In this United States of America, they have an affection for checked pants. They love checks. And so he said, you got to wear red checked pants. So I had the red steel wool coat, the wolf tie with a wolf and a half around my neck, and I had the checked pants. And he said, "Go ahead, now you can go to Greenville, North Carolina to give my first speech." And I had to go other places. I said I'd make arrangements. They were going to pick me up at 5:30 to meet 300 members of our booster club down in Greenville. And they said, "This first speech will spread throughout the state. You got to be innovative, creative, dynamic, motivated." I said, "I can do it. I can talk. I'm ready." So I'm on a plane going down. I'm sitting next to a woman's looking at me. Says, "Are you the new coach at NC State?" I said, "Yes, I am, ma'am." So I said, "I'm proud of it." She said, "Uh-huh, great." I said, "You an NC State fan?" She said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I'll make you one." She said, "No, you won't." Okay. Got off the plane, went to get my luggage, and the fella behind the counter said, "I saw your picture in the paper. You're the new coach." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "What you doing here in Greenville?" I said, "We got a booster club meeting. I bet you're a big NC State fan." He said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I'll make you one." He said, "No, you won't." Whew. I said, not a lot of fans here. Where are all these fans of mine? So I was going to picked up 5:30. It's 5:45. Nobody there. 6 o'clock. 6:15. Finally, at 6:30, I get a phone call, and I get paged. And I pick it up, and it's Charlie Bryan. He said, what are you doing there? I said, what do you mean? I'm in Greenville. He said, you are? He said, describe the airport to me. I said, there's a sign right behind me here. It says, Greenville, Spartanburg Airport. You see? And I didn't react, just as I'm sure most people wouldn't react until he told me. The most important speech of my life. 300 members of our booster club waiting to hear their new leader, this intelligent, dynamic Jim Valvano, right? Showed them I could lead them to a championship. And he informed me, Charlie Bryan did, that I flew to the wrong state. I flew to Greenville, South Carolina, rather than Greenville, North Carolina, dressed like Bozo the Clown. Right? He said, you get your tail in the state where you work. I said, I'm coming, boss, you know. And you know what it's like? Trying to hide the wolves and the checks. And I got back on that line. True story. And I said to the guy behind the counter, I said, excuse me, but I got to... He said, what'd you say, Coach? I said, did you know there's a Greenville in both North and South Carolina? And the guy stepped back and he yelled. He said, hey, Bert, I told you, Coach flew to the wrong state. And it was like everybody in the whole airport knew about it. And I couldn't get a flight back to North Carolina. And I actually was on the news that night because they sent the camera crew out. And there I am in this red coat, check pants tie, and the guys are saying to me, well, Coach, how do you like being in the league so far? We understand you flew to the wrong state. Oh, my goodness gracious. And before I left the airport that night, that same guy behind the counter said, Coach, let me tell you something, this is a tough league. He says, Dean Smith's going to beat your brains in if you don't figure out which state you're in, right? And that's how I started the most important job of my life, right? And the guy was right. I had a tough time my first year at NC State. I thought I knew what rivalries were like until I played in the North Carolina State rivalry. First game we played in Chapel Hill, lost by a point. A guy named James Worthy beat us, not a bad player. Next game we played was in Raleigh, Reynolds Coliseum. We lost by a point again. And this time a guy named Al Wood, who's in the NBA, he beat us with 2 free throws at the end. But my first year, I learned a lot about the ACC. We lost on my first game in the ACC after winning. I don't want to say I peaked too soon, but we got excited for our opening game that year. We played the Polish national team. We won we must have won by about 50 points, whatever it was, and I was like a maniac and a madman. And then a good friend of mine, Sam Esposito, our baseball coach, said, hey, you got to calm down. You got to take this a little bit at a time. There are too many big games, and he was right. We peaked for the Polish national team because we then opened our season in the league against Wake Forest. They beat us by 4 touchdowns, and I remember walking off the court, and everybody said, welcome to the ACC, Valvano. Wow, and I couldn't hide because I had that red coat and check pants on, too. But it was that kind of a year. We lost the game at Maryland. We were up by 10 points with 5 minutes to play. And it got down to we threw the ball away a couple of times, and finally we had a 3-point lead with just about 15, 18 seconds to play. Maryland had the ball. There was no 3-point shot back then. And I remember calling a timeout to tell my kids, worst thing you can do. Abe Lemons, the old coach at Texas, and was a great coach, used to say, never tell your players anything negative because it stays in their mind. He used to do this little thing at clinics. He'd say, for example, I'm going to say something right now. He'd say, black cows. And he said that there wasn't anybody in the room who at that moment didn't have a picture of a black cow in his mind. He said, I'm going to tell you, don't think of black cows. I don't want you to think about it. And he says, you can't. You have to. He said, well, the more I tell you not to, that's what you got in your mind. Same thing in coaching. Don't tell your kids what not to do. And so there I was in the huddle trying like crazy not to say, don't foul. Don't foul. Because we were up by 3. But it came out. I said, don't foul. Please don't foul. Whatever you do, don't foul. So naturally we go out. Albert King takes a jump shot from Maryland. Misses. Buck Williams gets the rebound. Fakes. Goes up. My kid, Craig Watts, goes up. Fouls him. Buck makes the basket. Makes the free throw. We lose in overtime. And it was... I remember the black cow story, and it helps me later on when we play in the NCAA tournament when I get in the same situation and I handle it just a little bit differently than I did right then. But that first year at NC State was really remarkable in the things I learned, because I learned so much that year, which I was able to put to good use in our remarkable run to the championship just 2 years later. So year number 1 ended with a 14-13 record, certainly not to the standards that NC State was used to. Just give you an example. North Carolina State University ranks in the top 20 in the history of basketball in both total wins and in winning percentage. In addition to that, NC State was one of the, just a handful of schools who have won one national championship. To put that in perspective, right now, as we talk, there are 10 schools in the history of the game that have won 2 national championships. There are only 3 schools, Kentucky, Indiana, and UCLA, that have ever won more than 2 national titles. So even winning one is a terrific accomplishment, and NC State was one of those schools. So 14 wins just doesn't cut it. But it was year one, and in most jobs, your first year is for free. Everybody's trying to figure out whether you're any good or you're not good. That year they just give you for free. Now, number 2 and number 3, you better start doing some things. So year number 2 for me, I was really feeling some pressure to perform. And I'll never forget how that year started. I was getting my hair cut on campus. And the one thing about coaching in North Carolina is because North Carolina State, and Duke are all within 25 miles of each other, you don't necessarily going to have a fan of yours just because you're in that town. I'm sure if you grow up in Lincoln, Nebraska, about everybody in Lincoln's going to be a Nebraska fan. But if you grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, you might just as well have sitting next to you in the barber chair someone who likes North Carolina, as was the case in year number 2. As I'm sitting there, and a gentleman sitting next to me saying, "Well, Coach, I don't envy your job." And I say, "Why?" He says, "Well, having to compete with Dean Smith has got to be very difficult." And I said, "Well, yeah, Dean's a great coach. A lot of great coaches." He said, "Oh, no, Dean's the best. What a job he does at North Carolina." And I said, "Yeah, I know Dean's good, but a lot of people have done well against Dean." He said, "Oh, no." I said, "Yeah, what about Norm Sloan? 14 years at NC State." He said, "Oh, he can't coach with Dean." I said, "No." He said, "Norm won a national championship." And he said, "Yeah, I know, but he's still not as good a coach as Dean." I said, "Yeah, how about the year that Norm Sloan went 27-0? And the guy, I'm telling you, as serious as can be, looked at me and said, "Yeah, could you imagine what Dean would have done with that team?" When you go up against that kind, undefeated, still not good enough when it comes to Dean Smith. And that's how much he is revered, and it is difficult to go up against the dean of coaches, not only in the state, but certainly in the country. So year number 2 was important to try and beat Carolina, but it was also important to get more than those 14 wins and to get to the NCAA tournament. That's when I decided that what I need is a plan. The plan was, I tell the kids all the time, 7-7, go to heaven. And what that meant was if you can win 7 games in the conference, I did a little study and found out that there wasn't a team in the ACC that ever won 7 games in the league, did not make the NCAA tournament. So though people thought I was kind of crazy by saying I only want to win 7, I tell my team, we have to win 7. If you want to win more than that, that's fine. But the minimum is 7 in the league, and we need to beat Carolina. Well, we got one of those 2 things done. Year number 2, we did go 7-7 in the league. We made the NCAA tournament, but we still did not beat North Carolina. In fact, it was a really tough first loss. We went to Hawaii to play in the Aloha Classic, and in fact, we had won all of our games up to that point, and in the finals, we lost the game by a couple of points to come back 12-1. We won 12 of our first 13 games. Remember, the year before we won 14. And who do we meet when we came back? First Clemson, beat them, go 13-1. Now we played Carolina, and we were fired up. Well, score was tied with 8 minutes to play. Final score, we lost by 20. Oh, wow, was that tough. So here we are now 13-2, but still we have not yet beat the Heels. Well, we went on to lose to them 2 more times that year to make it 6 times in 2 years to Carolina as they went on to win the national championship. They only lost 2 games all year. We made the NCAA tournament, but I learned another valuable lesson. We were just happy to make the tournament. We were thrilled to make it. And we played that first round game in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we played Tennessee, Chattanooga. Never play a school that's got a dash or a hyphen in its name. You want to play a whole state if you can. Play the whole state of Tennessee. Don't play Tennessee dash Chattanooga. They're really fired up to play you, and we were a little bit flat, and we just played a very bad basketball game, and we wound up losing to Tennessee, Chattanooga. We were into the tournament for a cup of coffee. So lose to the Heels a couple of times. They win the national championship. We get knocked out by a lot of our people. Fans said, "I think you lost to a train company or something, And I said, no. And so going into that summer, I knew that I had to, year 3, not just make the NCAA tournament, but I thought it was important to win some games in it, and also it was vital that we finally get a victory against the Tar Heels of North Carolina. Soon after the 1981-82 season, I took a look back over the previous 2 years and saw what I had accomplished and what I hadn't accomplished, what I had done well and what I didn't do very well. And I always felt this was an important part of any process when you're trying to be successful, and that is the criticism. You certainly get enough criticism from others in most businesses, but I think it's also important to criticize yourself, to be honest with yourself. Say, yeah, here's where I need improvement. Here's the things I need to do better. And I spend usually the summers doing that. I go down the beach, and basketball is never far from my mind as a coach, and it's true of all coaches. So while everyone's frolicking in the sun and the sand and the water, I tend to formulate what is it that I have to do better in order to reach my goals. And I felt that I hadn't done a good job in game preparation for my team on the half court. Half court offense I didn't think was good enough. I also didn't think I took advantage enough of some of our talents, our individual talents, to kind of tailor our offense for what the kids did do well. And lastly, I really felt I did a poor job with the schedule in preparing us for what I call that first round NCAA environment. The year before, we had lost to Tennessee Chattanooga. We're in Indianapolis. The first round of the NCAA is always like that, where you're playing someplace away from home, a team that's there's no home court advantage. The people who love basketball come to the game, but they don't cheer for either team. And it's kind of a blah environment. When you go from the ACC championships or just a normal in-season home game, which is packed, the cheerleaders doing backflips, the band's playing, it's television, it's big. And also you go to the NCAA, which is supposed to be the biggest thing of the year, and you got 15,000 people sitting on their hands, or I call them opera clappers. It's very polite applause, and you can get flat. Well, I had to prepare my team for the opera clapper type game, and so we scheduled a game in the Meadowlands in New Jersey against West Virginia for somewhere during our season, the early part of the season, to have our players get used to playing. There wasn't going to be a whole lot of West Virginia fans in Meadowlands, nor were there going to be a lot of NC State fans there. And yet it's going to be a big arena, the same type arena which is played often, host to the NCAA tournament. And so we had that game. I also scheduled a little tougher road games to try and toughen our club up as we were going on the road to play a tough Missouri team, in addition to this game with West Virginia. And so I tried to make the schedule tougher, and then I tried to make sure that I would do a better job of coaching our basketball team. And all of these things took place in the summer as we prepared for the 82-83 season. Now my goal, I'll be honest, my goal every year is to make the ACC finals and then get into the NCAA tournament and go as far as you can. I've always felt that way. In fact, I coined a phrase for it. It was called survive and advance. The idea was to just win the game you were playing. I never went into the 82-83 season or any other season saying, we're going to win the national championship this year. What our goal was to get in the tournament, win the first game, and advance. Win the next game, advance. Survive and advance. Little did I know what impact that philosophy would have on this particular season. But as I went into the season, I felt pretty good about my ball club. We had two seniors in the backcourt, Sidney Lowe and Derek Wittenberg. They'd played together since DeMatha Catholic High School. They'd been starting together for 8 consecutive years. So they certainly knew each other very well. Sidney, the consummate point guard, who passed at every turn to make each player on the team effective. Derek Wittenberg, of course, did not pass very much. I mean, Derek never met a jump shot he didn't like. He didn't pass the ball to anybody. Derek, the only pass he made was at Sidney's girlfriend, I think, in his sophomore year. That's about it. So Derek was the shooter. Sidney set it up. Thurl Bailey, the quiet 6'10 player from Maryland who would go on to star with the Utah Jazz. He had the quiet leadership. Derek was the vocal leader. And then we had two sophomores, Lorenzo Charles from Brooklyn and Cozell McQueen from Bennettsville, South Carolina, who uttered the very famous line when I recruited Cozell, and everyone said, you can't get a kid to leave South Carolina to come to North Carolina. And so when Cozell called me to say he was coming, I said, Co, what made you decide to come to North Carolina State? Thinking he'd say, it was you, Coach, it was you. He said, I wanted to get out of the South. So anyway, this was the group we had, and Cozell was the rebounder, 6'11", Lorenzo, a good inside player, Thurl, a medium-range player. We had all of the pieces in place, and now it was just up to me to get the job done. I thought we had a terrific team, and then in about the 7th game of the season, we were ranked 12th in the country when Derek Wittenberg were playing Virginia. They were ranked either 1 or 2 in America with Ralph Sampson, a great team. Derek had 29 points at the half, right, having a great game. We were winning by 16. Derek goes up at the beginning of the second half, comes down, lands on Othell Wilson's foot. He breaks his own, and they carry him off. And what everybody thought, myself included, was with him when any hopes of any dreams becoming reality. And the doctors told me that Derek would not play again that season. And so we had to adjust again. And we talked about adjustment before. In anybody's life, professional, personal, adversity is going to come. What do you do? What do you do? Well, you go back to the words of Kipling and others, and you make adjustments. And here we brought in a freshman named Ernie Myers from New York City to take Derek's spot. We lost the next 2 games after Derek was injured, but then we went on a roll. We won 8 consecutive games. And in fact, Ernie Myers averaged 18 points a game. And we were playing awfully well going down the stretch when I had to make another decision. Here it is, Derek Wittenberg, who had faithfully followed his regimen to gain strength back in his ankle after the bone had healed, and the doctors didn't think he'd play, but lo and behold, he comes back with 2 games remaining in the regular season, and he thinks he can go. He's a senior. He's got 2 games left in his career. Ernie Myers has now started all the games since Derek was there. We've won. We're on the verge of at least an NIT bid. What do I have to do? Well, I just looked in Derek's eyes and realized, how could I tell a youngster that you can't play the last 2 games of your career when a young man's a freshman who has 3 years left? And I sat down with Ernie Myers and said, Ernie, I hope you'll understand that if you're ever going to be in this position when you're a senior, you'll know what I'll do, because I'm going to let Derek play. And Ernie accepted it, and then Derek went out, and we lost our next 2 games because we had to adjust again to Derek. We had learned how to play without him. So we lose 2 games in a row as we go into the ACC tournament, 17-10. The year before, we won 22 games. And here we are with 17 wins in year number 3 and saying, I'm not sure that this is going to get it done. The only highlight of year number 3 was that after losing to North Carolina at Carolina, I'm now playing the Heels in Raleigh, and it's 7 times in a row we've lost. And Derek Wittenberg's hurt, and doesn't appear we have any chance. This is the great thing about sports. It's what it teaches you all the time. 2 weeks before our game against Carolina, we played in the North-South tournament. That's a tournament which is hosted by North Carolina State with 2 other teams. In this case, it was the Citadel and Furman. And so we play, and Carolina plays the Citadel and wins by about 30. We play Furman, win by about 2. Carolina plays Furman, wins by about 40. And we play the Citadel and win by 1. And now the very next week, we're playing Carolina. Who do you think's going to win this game? I mean, when you look at comparative scores, plus they already beat us once. Well, they come into Reynolds, and the kids just play a great game. And we wind up, for the first time, beating North Carolina. In the class of Dean Smith, he came down with about 15 seconds left in the game when it was obvious we were going to win, and he said, I'm happy for you. And I'm sure he was. And that's the kind of man that he is. And boy, I was awful happy for me, too. And the whole team was happy. And so, although we were 17-10, we did have that first win against Carolina going into the ACC tournament. And our last game of the season, we played Wake Forest, and we beat them by 41 points. Back then, there was a 3-point shot in the ACC and a 30-second clock, so you had to play. We scored 139 points against Wake Forest, which was a record for that season, and we won by 41. So naturally, who do we play in the first round of the ACC tournament? Wake Forest. Well, you know how the fans are. Well, you just beat them by 41 points. It should be a blowout. That's right, folks, it's a blowout. We win 71-70, and we win with Sidney Lowe getting a steal with under a minute to play, and Lorenzo Charles making one of 2 free throws with 3 seconds left in the game as we win 71-70. And then we play Carolina the second game, and Carolina is a great basketball team, and they happen to be ranked at this point in the top 5 in the country, and they're smartened from the first defeat at our hands in quite some time, and they've got a nice lead. 8 points or so in the second half. We come back, tie it, send it into overtime. Derek Wittenberg, who did not score, was held in check the whole game, has 11 points in overtime as we come back and beat the Heels 91-84. And now, one of my dreams is a reality. We're going to play in the ACC championship game. I'm just a lot into the history of the sport, and in the history of the ACC, North Carolina has won the most ACC tournaments, followed by North Carolina State. But I never really felt at home at North Carolina State because I didn't have any banners. When I first took the job, I'd go into Reynolds Coliseum, this storied building built by Everett Case in the 40s, which was the largest on-campus arena in America at its time. And NC State led the country for over a decade in attendance. And I'd stand in this facility by myself and look up at the banners. And Everett Case had so many banners he had won there. Norm Sloan had a national championship banner and an ACC banner. There were no banners of mine. And I used to say, this isn't my job. I'm not home until I have my own banner. And now here we were playing in my third year for a chance to get my own banner and a chance to win another ACC title for NC State. And who did we have to play? The Cavaliers of Virginia, a team that I hadn't beaten either in my 3 years at NC State. And they were ranked number 2 in America at this point. And just a great basketball, led by Ralph Sampson, the player of the year in college basketball. And most people felt Virginia would win the national championship this year. And we go out to an 11-point lead. We were so excited. They caught us, took the lead, as happened for the rest of the year. We had to come back, and we did come back. And the big play was with a 1-point lead late in the game. They throw it into Ralph Sampson, and Terry Gannon strips him of the ball, and we go on to win 83-80, and we win an ACC championship. And I get to cut the nets down, and I never thought any feeling could be better than this ACC championship win. It was just a remarkable performance by this basketball team. It made us 20-10, but with the championship came an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament, and we all waited to hopefully we'd play a whole state, and maybe we'd play them close to home. So here come the bids. Pepperdine in Corvallis, Oregon. Pepperdine, we didn't know if it was a toothpaste or a university. All right? I'm only kidding, because I knew how good Pepperdine was. They were coached by Jim Harrick, the coach who is now at UCLA. They had an outstanding, and I knew they'd be sky high to play an ACC team, especially the ACC tournament champions. But if I heard it once from our fans, I heard it a dozen times. They thought we were playing Pepsodent. And so I knew this was going to be a tough game. Of course, the fans didn't think so, but I knew it would be. And I also remembered the year before we played Tennessee Chattanooga. We were flat. Well, I was determined we would not be flat. And we went out there sky high. And then we missed our first about 8 shots. And we played horribly. And most people, because it was a late game on the coast, went to sleep. They all went to sleep. All our fans turned the sets off. When we were down by 5 points with 29 seconds to play, we were down by 4 or 5 points, and it looked like it was over. So we resorted to fouling. We fouled their best free throw shooter, a young man by the name of Dane Suttle. He missed. We scored. We fouled again. He missed. We wound up tying the game, went into overtime, went into double overtime, and we wind up beating Pepperdine in the first game in a miraculous way. All of the people went to sleep, woke up the next morning, thought we lost, saw the papers that we won. They were shocked. That is when it started. The Team of Destiny logo started. I remember telling my team in the locker room, I think it's just destined. I said, it's destined for us to win. And then the next game we played was Jerry Tarkanian's Vegas bunch. They were ranked in the top 5 in the country also. They had us by 11 points in the second half. We came back. It came down again till we were down by 1 with seconds remaining. We fouled one of their players. He shot and missed. We raced it down the court. Derek Wittenberg shot. He missed. Thurl Bailey tapped it. He missed it. He tapped it again. He missed. Then he grabbed it. He put it back in. It goes in. And we got a 1-point lead. They take a last shot. No good. We win by a point. That's when in the locker room, Thurl Bailey said to a reporter, I think with the Team of Destiny. And that became our logo now. Everyone called us the Cardiac Pack, the Cardiac Kids, the Team of Destiny. And so now we're on our way to the regionals, and that's in Salt Lake City, Utah, with Boston College playing the Virginia Cavaliers and NC State against Utah. We're in Utah. We now have to play Utah. I mean, how much did we have to overcome this year? So we played Jerry Pim's Utes, the running Utes of Utah, who had just upset UCLA. We're playing them at Weber State, and we didn't just play good. We played great. All of the games before this were all 1-point games, and that wasn't the case here, as we absolutely rolled. In the first half, we shot about 70%, and Jerry Pim later was to say, he told the team at halftime, they can't shoot like that again. He was right. We shot 78%. In the second half, we won 75-56. I mean, our first real breather. And I didn't want to let myself think about going to the Final Four, but yet, you know, the Black Cows again were in my mind. That's all I could think about, was we were 1 game away from the Final Four. We had to beat Ralph Sampson and Virginia again in the regional finals. And it was just as the other games had been. It came right to the wire. And his situation is Lorenzo Charles going to the free throw line with less than a minute to play. And we're down by a point. And I had the timeout. And what I had to not say was what to do if Lorenzo misses. Remember, a coach's job here is he's got a 1-and-1. If he makes the first, he gets the second. If he makes the first and misses the second. If he makes them both. If he misses the first, you got to cover all these things. But you don't want to be negative. You don't want to get in a huddle and say, okay, here's what we're going to do if Lorenzo misses. You can't do that. And so I got in a huddle, and for the whole timeout, I said, okay, Lo, you're going to knock them both in. You're my man. You're going to get it done. And here's what we're going to do. After Lorenzo makes them both, we're going to play pressure defense. We're going to play this particular defense. I went over only things we'd do after he made it. Then we broke the huddle. I put my fist in Lorenzo's face again and said, Lo, you're going to do it, baby. I know you can make it. You're going to knock him in. He's going to knock him in. Then when he went, I grabbed Sidney Lowe, and I said, Sidney, here's what we do if Lorenzo misses. You had a hedge your bet in there somewhere. I said, tell the team this, right? Lorenzo knocked them both in. We guarded Othell Wilson and Ralph Sampson in the last possession. Timmy Mullen, a left-hander from New Jersey who hadn't taken a shot the whole game. He took the jumper. He missed. And it was happened. Reality. We won. We were cutting the nets down. We were on our way to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the Final Four. And I'm telling you, I thought that nothing could be better than winning the ACC tournament. But I found myself here with the regional finals. Weber State University is kind of in a round, and I just kept walking around. I kept walking around on the outside in the corridor. And every once in a while I'd open the door and there'd be people out there and I'd say, isn't it amazing? We're going to the Final Four. Close the door and walk around some more. I think I could have walked to Albuquerque if I had to, but we didn't. In fact, we hadn't been home for the entire trip. We went out to Corvallis, Oregon. We played there and then stayed there. We finally got to go home, which was our first trip back. And we got back. It was unbelievable. Pep rallies. The crowd at the airport was fantastic. We had open practices. 5,000 to 6,000 people would come to every single practice. And I'm not sure I wanted to go to Albuquerque. I just wanted to stay there and just keep celebrating. I thought we could only ruin it if we went out there. And it was just a magnificent week before the Final Four. We finally went out to Albuquerque, and it was a great Final Four. Louisville was to play Houston, two masters of the dunk. Phi Slamma Jamma versus the Doctors of Dunk. Louisville had a great team, as did Houston. Houston had won 25 games in a row. They were ranked number 1 in America. All right, we were going to play Georgia. The Bulldogs from Georgia in the Southeastern Conference had upset none other than North Carolina in the regional finals. So now we got a chance to play the team that beat the team that we love to beat. And so that was the first game, and it looked like a JV game. Everybody was talking about the Houston and Louisville matchup, and this was going to be the junior varsity game. As we played Georgia, they played like dogs, which was their nickname, shot horribly, and we had an 18-point lead in the second half, and we coasted to a 67-60 win. Didn't play that well, but enough to get into the championship game. Then I went in the stands and watched the Houston-Louisville game. And as all those people who were there can attest, as the media said, it might have been the greatest game ever played. The level of play was phenomenal. And there was a stretch in the second half of about 7 minutes when Houston went from 6 points down to 6 points up, where they dunked everything. No one was safe. They would dunk women and children. Anybody. They dunked so much they had names for the dunks. Well, after the game was over and the dust settled, everybody said there was no way in the world that NC State could even be in the same building. People, the Washington Post said that trees would tap dance, elephants would drive in the Indianapolis 500, Orson Welles would skip breakfast, lunch, and dinner before NC State figured out a way to beat Houston. I'm talking about, some papers said Valvano should be given a blindfold. You always have a blindfold and a cigarette at an execution. There wasn't anybody who thought we could win. Well, there were some people. Those are the kids dressed in NC State's red and white. Those are the coaches. Those are the people who had gone through an incredible season, which saw Derek Wittenberg break his ankle, and now we're playing in the national championship game. And I remember talking to my team prior to the game about reading the newspapers, and no one gave us a chance. Well, the fact was, we were the only other team playing that day. We had a better chance than anybody else. As I told the kids, we had beaten the number 5, the number 4, the number 3, and the number 2 team in America. In the last 3 weeks, there was only one left, and that's the number 1 team. And that was the team of the Houston Cougars, and with Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. I'll never forget the talk before the game. The word is called focused in coaching, and we were focused. And I got into each youngster's face and said, Sidney Lowe, you're going to play the game of your life. You're going to be the point guard, and for us to win, you can't have any turnovers, and you're not. And you're going to play the finest game you've ever played and lead us to the national championship. Derek Wittenberg, you're going to make every jump shot you take. You're going to play the greatest game you've ever played. We're going to win a national championship. Thurl Bailey, you're going to rebound and block shots and play the greatest game, and we're going to be national champions. And Cozell McQueen, you're going against Hakeem Olajuwon, and you're going to neutralize him on the boards, and you're going to rebound like you've never rebounded. We're going to win a national championship. And Lorenzo Charles, you're going to handle the blocks, the inside game, and we're going to win a national. I went to every single kid's face, and I told them, I've never been more ready in my life to coach a game. I'm going to coach the best game I've ever coached. And right now, this entire country thinks that North Carolina State doesn't have a chance in the world. And I told them, I promise you, we go out and do the things we've been doing, we're going to come home with the national championship. And they almost knocked the walls off the doors, and they ran out, and we did everything we wanted to. In the first half, we held the Cougars to no dunks. We were ahead 33-25 at the half. And then the second half, they came out and absolutely wiped us up. Had a 15-2 run to start the half, and we were down. And I used to tell my kids all year long, if we're in a position to win at the end of the game, we can win. It's a game of runs. We had ours, they had theirs. We had 5 minutes to get ourselves in a position to win. And we're going to do it by playing intelligent offense and fouling on defense. Put them on the line. So we fouled them. Guy Lewis helped us out. He slowed the ball down. He held the ball to use some clock. We fouled. They missed. Wittenberg hit a jumper to cut it to 2. Wittenberg hit a jumper to tie the ball game. A minute to play. We foul the point guard for Houston. He steps up to the line. He misses. We get the rebound. 44 seconds to play. We call timeout. And I told the kids, we're going to win it. We've got it right here. Now, we fouled. Now, Guy Lewis and Houston did not foul us back. They could have fouled us, but they did not. We held it. The play that we had set up was supposed to have Sidney Lowe drive to the basket, pass off to either Terry Gannon on one side or Derek Wittenberg on the other. Unfortunately, Houston pressed us, half-court trap. We didn't get the shot we wanted. Time was running down. Barely passed it out. Wittenberg, an air ball, but Lorenzo Charles grabbed it and he dunked it. And like that, we were the national champions. We were the 9th team in the history of basketball to win 2 national championships. And it was one of the most exciting, emotional moments about anyone who watched the tape of this crazy son of Rocco and Angelina sprinting around the court. Where was he going? Hey, I was looking for somebody to hug. I wanted to celebrate. And I couldn't find anybody to hug. And finally, Mr. Willis Casey, our director of athletics, the man who hired me, he grabbed me and he hugged me. And he kissed me, too. And I said, oh, my goodness, here I am, the highlight of my life, and I'm kissing a 65-year-old overweight guy on national television. But it was the best hug and kiss I've ever had. And we won the national championship.
14, 13, now to Gannon. Gannon back to Lowe, 10 seconds. Now Sidney goes to Bailey in the corner. 5 seconds left to Wittenberg. Wittenberg tries about a 30-footer. No good. Step back. Lorenzo Charles. Safe. Lorenzo Charles slams it in. A missed shot from 35 feet. Lorenzo Charles grabbed it, stuffed it back in. The Cinderella team has done it. The glass slipper fit. The Wolfpack has won the national championship. All right, the Wolfpack has done it here in miraculous fashion. They have come from behind. They were down by 7 points, and they have won it on the last second. And so many times has it happened. This is the 10th time it has happened since the string started. And the Houston Ball Club, they're very upset.
All aboard, Valvano roared, old number 1 is due. Our cardiac contraption with a 5-man Wolfpack crew. We'll huff and puff and strut our stuff and race the hands of time. Oh, how sweet to have a seat aboard the Wolfpack line. Hardward hearts are bouncing up the Wolfpack track. A cardiac contraption brought the Wolfpack back.
And after we won the national championship, I'm telling you, it was maybe I wasn't prepared for all of the things that would happen to me after that national championship. But I got a chance to do an awful lot of speaking. I got a chance to do a lot of things. One of the more memorable things was to get a call one day from, I was home. The phone rang, and I said, very witty, hello. And they said, is this Coach Valvano? I said, yes, it is. They said, this is the White House calling. And I said, oh, good. So I hung up. Now, maybe you get a lot of calls for the White House. I myself did not. So the phone rang again. They said, Coach, don't hang up. This is the White House. So I did what most men would do. I said, I didn't hang up. My wife knocked the phone off the hook. Blame her. Let her get in trouble. But it was the way. I'd forgotten that if you win a national championship, a Super Bowl, the World Series, whatever, you get calls from the White House. You go visit the president. And make a long story short, I love to laugh. But maybe the finest line I've ever had in my life was when the President of the United States, before he went on television, said, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Valvano? And I said, Valvano. He said, good. And I said, is yours Regan or Reagan? Well, anyway, you got to take him. You take the last one you can get him, right? But anyway, I went to the White House. In fact, I went twice. And the man is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. He was very warm and friendly and made me feel at home. And that was a terrific thing. Well, recruiting picked up, both for good and for bad. We talked so much about rats and how important it was, but now with this increased visibility, we're able to recruit more and better athletes. And that might have been the start of some of the problems that I did have, although not immediately. We recruited some fine kids. For example, Spud Webb, the 5 foot, well, you like to say 7, but Spud's not 5'7". But I remember when we recruited him, we'd lost out on some other guards, and so Spud was still available, and he came off the plane. And I was in the airport, and I was looking at this little guy walking over to me, and I said to my assistant, if that's Spud Webb, you're fired. And it was Spud Webb, and not only wasn't my assistant fired, but I had the privilege for 2 years of coaching one of the most exciting basketball players I think that's ever suited up. Spud is just a joy to watch, and He won the dunk contest in the NBA several years later. Nobody epitomizes more the theory and the idea that you can accomplish many things that others don't think you can, and Spud certainly did that. He was one of the really good ones. That first year after the national championship, we won 19 games, and we're really rolling when we lost an overtime game to Duke late in the year for our 7th loss, and we went into a tailspin, which we never recovered from. We lost so many close games, we wound up going to the NIT that year. But more significantly than that was the recruiting of a young man by the name of Chris Washburn, 6'11" young man who was a Parade magazine All-American 3 years in a row. The only other person who's ever done that was a fellow by the name of Louis Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's how talented this Washburn was. But I'll say right up front, this was the start of a lot of my problems at NC State, because although Chris was a very likable young man, he was more of a follower than he was a leader, and he got himself into some difficulty right away in his freshman year. But then the big thing is he was accused of stealing a stereo from a fellow student. When the student found out it was Chris, and Chris said it was just a prank, the student tried to drop the charges. But I learned a lot about the legal system in this country, because once it's downtown, it's up to the district attorney to drop charges. And the fact is, if he probably were not a 6'11", 250-pound All-American, it was just 2 students, I don't think people would get too bent out of shape. But when it's a star, no one wants to make it appear they're getting special treatment. So instead of being able to drop the charges, it was fully prosecuted. And I threw Chris off the team that year. He had to serve community service, 250 hours, etc., etc. But what was really harmful is in the court documents, they put his academic background, which was really supposed to be private as a part of the Buckley Amendment, and this is where it showed that Chris's board scores were so low, and in fact it embarrassed him and his family, and may have brought about the Proposition 48 that we hear so much about. But I will still always feel that people like Chris Washburn certainly deserve the opportunity to go to college, but maybe should not be allowed to play until they prove that academically they can handle university life. And so this was the first real national negative publicity we'd ever received, and it was just a portent of things to come. But the year 2 after the championship went very well. We had a terrific basketball team. We went back to the NCAAs, and in fact, it might have been the most talented team that I had. We had Washburn at center, Charles Shackelford, a name which will come up later at one forward, Benny Bolton, Nate McMillan, who was in the NBA. We had a terrific team, and we wound up playing in the St. John's in a regional final. Spud Webb was in his senior year. It was Cozell McQueen's and Lorenzo Charles' senior year. Wound up playing St. John's in the regional finals out in Denver, Colorado. And in the last minute of play, big play, came down, we're down by 3. Cozell McQueen gets it, drives to the basket, shoots, it goes in, and he's got the foul shot. If he makes it, I think it's a tie, and the referee calls a charge. Go down the other end, Chris Mullen hits a 3-point play, we wind up losing. The significance of this particular game is after it was over, I called up home, as I did after every game that we played. My father had his yellow pad games where he'd keep all of the mistakes that I would make in a game, and then we'd go over it after the game. He no longer needed, at least I felt, he didn't need the yellow pad anymore, but he still kept those notes, and I would speak to him after every game. And I was particularly depressed after losing this game because I was so close to having my dream come true again. We were 1 game away from the Final Four, just 1 game away, and it slipped through our fingers. But I called home, and I was depressed, and my father said, "What are you down about?" And I said, "Hey, Pop, what do you mean I'm down? We just lost. We were so close, and we lost." He said, "Are you kidding me? You're so fortunate. Look at that. Look at the ring on your finger. Look at that national championship ring. Plus, you got the whole team back next year. You got a great job and a great Oh, he went on and on and on. And he made me feel really guilty about it. And I said, "You know, you're right, Pop." And he made me laugh. And then when it was over, I said to him, "You know something, Dad?" And he said, "What?" I said, "I love you, Dad." And then I hung up. And the significance of that is those are the last 4 words that I ever said to my father. I said, I love you, Dad, because that night he had a heart attack and he died. And it was a very traumatic thing for me. And those of you who've lost a loved one, you know the feeling. Well, that was the first time that it happened to me. And all my life, I had talked about how to overcome adversity. I talked about how you can be successful in a competitive environment. I'd spoken to business groups throughout the country, and I'd talk about the value of enthusiasm, the value of having a dream, and the value of work and in reaching your goals. And I talked about adversity, but I guess I really didn't know it until now. And I was no longer enthusiastic, and I did not have many dreams, and I didn't want to work anymore. And I found out that my life was going a little bit down in my performance, both in my personal and my business life. And I couldn't understand what it was I was missing. And so finally I went away by myself for a while to think about it. And I just realized about my dad. And I remembered that when I first became a coach, we sat down and my father said, what do you want to do with this business? I said, Pop, I'm going to win a national championship someday. And he said, you will. You'll do it. And I said, it's really hard, Dad. A lot of people have coached don't win. He said, you will. I know you will. You'll make it. You'll make it. And then I worked 8 years of my life before we even made the tournament. This tournament is my dream and my goal. I worked 8 years, never even made the tournament. I finally made it at Iona College. And I celebrated at home with my family. And my father called me upstairs in his bedroom, and he said, see that? And there was a suitcase. And I said, yeah, where are you going? He said, it's packed. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the national championship with you this year. I said, Pop, it's the first year I'm in the tournament. He said, you're going to go there. We lost in the first round. The next year, we made the tournament again. I celebrated at my family's house. My dad said, suitcase is still packed. And I said, yeah, I know, we lost again. Then when I moved to North Carolina, it became a line. It was something my dad would always say to me. He'd say, son, my bags are packed. Suitcase is packed. I'm on my way. I'm ready. It's packed. And in 1983, when we won the national championship, I have a great picture of my dad and I hugging on center court. And I remember celebrating in the hotel afterwards, and my father telling me, I told you, his bags were packed, and there he was, and him telling me how proud he was of me and how much he loved me. And he said to me, he also said, as you would expect a father, he said, I just want you to know, too, I can still knock you on your keister if I had to. I said, I know you can't, Bob. He said, what are you going to do now, though? I said, I'm going to win it again. He said, I think you will. I said, well, it's hard. He said, oh, you will. I said, Dad, it's really hard. He said, you will, and I'll be there. I said, I know you will. And I have a great article where my dad, during the press conference in Albuquerque, he was in the back of the room, and a writer came up to him and said to him, how do you feel? And what's this like? And my father said that other than the day he married my mother, and not a nice thing, not many people talk that way, but my father said it. He said, other than the day he married my mother, this was the happiest moment of his life, because tonight was the night he saw his son's dream come true. Isn't it beautiful to be there when other people's dreams come true? Well, these are the things that were running through my mind after I lost my dad and when I was by myself. And then all of a sudden it hit me that my father had given me something that no one else had given me, and that people don't give to each other. And I realized why I missed him so much. My whole family, my mom and my dad, but especially my dad, gave me a thing, I call it the gift my father gave me. That all throughout my life, when I had failed, when I flew to the wrong airport, when I lost by 20 points, when I didn't live up to a standard that someone else had set for me, or a standard I set for myself, or whenever people would find shortcoming in my life, my father would look me in the eye and he'd say, I believe in you. The gift my dad gave me my whole life was he believed in my ability, he believed in my worth, and he was gone now. And that's what I missed so much. And I think it's one of the most significant lessons I've ever learned in my life. In a world where it's so filled with people who don't believe in each other, no wonder we have some of the problems. And from that day that I learned and realized the gift my father gave me, I made a decision that I would give that gift of belief to the people who I loved and the people who I worked with and the people who worked for me and the people I worked for. The idea that if you want to be successful in this world today, in the world of competition, or in just your personal life. If you can be enthusiastic, if you can have dreams, if you can have goals, and you can work and you can fail, but you also can give the gift of belief to other people, it'll come back to you tenfold. And that's what I learned after the St. John's game. And it's a gift that my dad gave me, and I've been trying hard to repay. And I wish we all could give it to each other. In 1986-87, we had one of those strange years. We finished 6th in the ACC. In the history, maybe in looking back, this is the kind of year that's best for me. This is when the Rats take over. 86-87, we came in 6th in the league. Right? In the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference, only one other time had a team from 6th position won the ACC tournament. Only happened once. And I remember telling our kids in the locker room, it only happened once, but maybe it can happen again. And we went and we beat Duke in overtime. We beat Wake Forest in double overtime. Now we're playing North Carolina. I'll give you the magnitude of this game. North Carolina was undefeated that year in the league. That only happened one other time in the history of the league, where a team had gone through the entire conference undefeated. They'd beaten us by 18 and 17 points. And here we are playing North Carolina, undefeated team, and here's a squad that we were 6th in the league. And, I remember the locker room speech, telling them that I believed that they could do it, and I really did. And we went out and beat North Carolina by a point to become only the second team in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference to win a championship, coming from that far down in the race. And I remember also accepting the championship trophy from the commissioner of the ACC and saying that, Dad, this one's for you. And I know my father was looking down and probably telling somebody up there, hey, I knew it all along, my bags were packed. But it was a special win. And who would have ever thought that a team that created such joy and such a special win would have been the subject of so much trouble shortly thereafter? Because the following year, we were 12-1, and we had some wonderful kids. Chris Corciani, a young man from Miami, Florida, who was to become the all-time leading assist player at NC State. Rodney Monroe, who was going to become either number 1 or number 2 on the all-time scoring list at North Carolina State, and some other terrific kids. Well, we were 12-1 and getting ready on January 7th to play national televised game against Temple. And the night before, January 6th, I got a call from a writer from the News and Observer who read me the unpublished, but then it was the book jacket of a soon-to-be published book, which was going to allege all kinds of wrongdoing at NC State and its basketball program, including changing of grades, changing drug test results, and exchanging millions of dollars from the Wolfpack Club to the players via the coaching staff. Obviously, what a shock this was, and we immediately denied any wrongdoing, but by the same token, that started a tremendous 15-month period of problems for me personally and professionally, and maybe the landscape of college basketball will not be the same because of what took place from January 7th on. But we had to continue that season, and we did. We continued the season. In fact, went on to win the regular season of the ACC in spite of the turmoil, and went to the ACC tournament. And again, I'm always going to be one for firsts. We came in first, and we played the 8th place team in the league. Never in the history of the league had the 8th place team beat the first place team. Well, I took care of that because we got beat 71-49. The worst performance in the history of the league. And I'm telling you, it was an amazing feeling to play so poorly. But we got ourselves hitched up our pants and said, hey, we're going to the NCAA tournament, and we got to do better. And we did. We played in the tournament, went up to Providence. We beat South Carolina in the first game. Then we played Iowa, a great game in double overtime. Rodney Monroe scored 40. We beat them. Now we go to the regionals, and I thought maybe this was our year again. And who do we face? The Georgetown Hoyas of John Thompson. Same club that I lost to when I was at Iona, right down the stretch. And wouldn't you know it, come down to the final minutes of play. Chris Corchiani with the ball, down by 3, drives the lane, shot goes up, it's good. A foul is called. The referee changes his call, says it's a walk. And even Billy Packer, right, who was at courtside and did the game for CBS, called it the worst call in NCAA history. Rick Hartzell, who was the referee who made the call, who incidentally, how's this, is the athletic director at Bucknell, where I worked. He sent me a letter in the summer stating he made a mistake. Oh, but that didn't help because we wound up losing that game, and I was depressed, but little did I know it was going to be my last chance at a national championship at NC State.
All aboard, Valvano roared, old number 1 is due. Our cardiac contraption with a 5-man Wolfpack crew. We'll huff and puff and strut our stuff and race the hands of time. Oh, how sweet to have a seat aboard the Wolfpack line. Hardward hearts are bouncing up the Wolfpack track. Our cardiac contraption brought the Wolfpack back.
And looking back on the 15-month period from January 7th, 1989 to about April 7th, 1990, I tend to look at it as my Shirley MacLaine out-of-body experience. It just seemed to me at times they weren't talking about me. You know, there's that old line about surgery, that the difference between minor surgery and major surgery is minor surgery is surgery performed on someone else. When it's on you, it's major. I'd like to share with you the 15-month period because so many significant, I think, issues are raised that not necessarily pertain to me, but pertain to the news in general. For example, does the media create the news or they report the news? And there are other issues in terms of my particular profession, the role of intercollegiate athletics on university campuses, the role of the NCAA and how it investigates and handles college sports. All of these things happened to me in this 15-month period, and I want to take a look at it day by day. Saturday, January 7th, 1989. My ball club's getting ready to play Temple, and Temple Owls, a pretty good basketball team. And in fact, we're going to introduce a brand new type uniform made by Nike called a unitard. When the night before, I got a phone call from Chip Alexander from the News and Observer, and he read to me what was going to be on a book jacket cover in a book which was not published yet, but they thought soon to be published, called Personal Fouls. And this book was going to talk about wrongdoing in my basketball program. 3 major areas. Number 1, it said that millions of dollars exchanged hands from our Wolfpack club, our booster club, to the players. Number 2, grades were changed. And number 3, we hid the results of drug tests. Well, these hit me like certainly a bomb, but by the same token, I knew these allegations were absurd. So I did what any coach has to do in that situation, and that is immediately say we will call the NCAA in to investigate these charges. I'll be honest, I felt very safe that these allegations were absurd and could not have been true. By the same token, when you invite the NCAA in to look at your program, it's like saying at the end of the year, you know something, I'm not sure my taxes were done right. I think I'll call the IRS. January 9th, on a Monday, Dr. Polton, who is the chancellor of North Carolina State University, and I drafted a letter to the NCAA requesting an investigation. Dr. Jim Manley, who is our team's physician, had his own press conference to explain that our drug testing program was, you ready for this? Non-punitive, confidential, and voluntary. It is, by its nature, impossible to withhold the results from anyone, since it is a confidential test that can only be shared with the student-athlete himself. And if the student-athlete so desires, with the student-athlete's parents, in addition to the athletic director, who would also know, and that's it. A name which also surfaced on January 8th, Dr. Hugh Fuller, who is the head of our academic skills program. That is the program that helps tutor what is known as at-risk students, which an awful lot of athletes happen to be in that category. He said that he was concerned about the lack of academic progress of some of the basketball players. At the same time, a series of articles emerged named John Simons. That is the name of the manager who worked 1 year with our basketball program at NC State, and he was the source for author Peter Goldenbach, who was the one who had written this book, Personal Fouls, which was not, as I say, out yet, just the allegations on a book jacket cover. And John Simons, as far as I was concerned, again, if that was the source, it could not be very serious. The young man had only been a manager for 1 year, and he was not a very happy camper, as they say. In fact, I was to learn later on from Coach Dick Tarrant, who was the coach at Richmond, a friend of mine, that John and one of my players, Walker Lambiot, tried to transfer together as a package deal prior to the start of this year to go to the University of Richmond. And so once again, I felt you have a disgruntled player and a disgruntled manager. How serious can anything be, especially when the charges are so absurd? On Thursday, January the 12th, Dr. Richard Laufer, who was a former head of the Department of Physical Education, he states that he, as the department head, when he was at NC State in 85 and 86, he states that Chris Washburn's grades were changed and that Dr. Polton knew about it. On Thursday, January 12th, Roddy Jones, who was the chairman of the Board of Governors, says that there will be no investigation of the NC State basketball program by the Board of Governors. I thought that was good news. Until Friday, January 13th. Certainly an appropriate date. That's when editorial writers in the state, especially from the News and Observer, our local paper, absolutely pounded the decision by the Board of Governors not to investigate NC State's program. Wednesday, January 18th. The NC State Faculty Senate, now this is made up of all faculty members, they now question the basketball team's graduation rate. And a moment here, because this is a result of a meeting which I had with the Faculty Senate several months prior to this date of January 18th, when they invited me to discuss just basketball on a university campus, recruiting, graduation, etc., etc. And I had an extremely frank and candid discussion with this group, and I thought it was a good one. However, some members of that faculty senate brought this particular issue to the newspapers. What had happened was, when they asked me, why don't I recruit better students? I should have better students. And I said, well, I'd like to recruit better students. This is the first time academics became an issue. I said, we all like to recruit better students. They said, well, why don't you go do so? I said, okay, let me just give you this scenario. I said, let's say I go on the road recruiting, and there's a youngster who is interested in coming to the Atlantic Coast Conference to play basketball. And he's a great student. He's a great athlete. And he narrows his choices only to ACC schools. So now I'm asking you, just as being, try to be not biased, rank the schools in order of their academic excellence as perceived by the public. And no one would say anything. I said, well, let me help you out. Let's try to do it in the state. We have 4 schools in the ACC in our state: North Carolina, Duke, Wake Forest, North Carolina State. I said, would you put North Carolina State first? And finally someone said, well, I think the perception would be that probably Duke would be first. I said, okay, so we're not first. Would you put us second? And so someone said, well, we certainly are first or second in textiles. I said, well, not that many youngsters we recruit say, Coach, well, I want to go into textiles. So when I go into the home to recruit the finest student athlete in the state, if he wants to play in the ACC and he says, I want to get the best combination, he tends to think of Duke or North Carolina. So it's a lot more difficult than you think. And they said, well, you still should have a higher graduation rate. And so this was the first time that I said to the members of the faculty, do all of you know what the graduation rate is at NC State? And no one really knew. Picture that. I'm being brought to task here. And so I told them, and ready for this? And I say this, and I have to always clarify it. The graduation rate in a 4-year period at North Carolina State is 24%. That's right. Not athletes, folks. 24% graduate in 4 years at North Carolina State University. So then they said to me, well, then how do you overcome that? I said, here's how I try to do it. And I explained I showed him this pie chart that we use that says of all the kids I've recruited, 86% of the kids I've recruited at NC State have either graduated from NC State or another four-year school, are playing professional basketball either in Italy or, in Europe or in the United States, or they are still in school pursuing a degree. That is what I said, and I left. This little meeting I had now surfaced 2 months later as I had said that 86% of the kids I recruited graduated, and they found that figure not to be so. I never said that, but that was just the beginning of some academic difficulty and some misconceptions. Thursday, January 19th, the NCAA arrives on campus. Mr. Dave Didion is going to be our chief investigator, and his first goal is to just look at the academic issues and was there any grade changing at all. Tuesday, January 24th, Benny Bolton, a four-year player at State during the 84 to 87 seasons, is quoted extensively in personal fouls. He says he doubts that any of the allegations in the book were true, and he said he's never spoken with Peter Golenbach, and yet he is quoted throughout the book. Thursday, January 26th, we beat Duke 88 to 73. Not a bad win, considering 2 months later, Duke goes to the national semifinals of the NCAA. Friday, January 27th, the academic deans at NC State issue a statement expressing strong objections to the continuing distortions in the press of information concerning the grades of a former student. Okay? We have examined the records in question, say the deans, and find the official record does not support the allegations concerning grade changes. Now picture this. They've already said allegation number one they found not to be true. Did not get much print. President Spangler of the university system, he appoints a commission headed by Sam Poole, which becomes known as the Poole Commission, to investigate the basketball program, which means we now have the NCAA investigating. We now have the Poole Commission investigating. Saturday, February 11th, the AP reports the Poole Commission investigated allegation of corruption at NC State's basketball program, has compiled 3,000 pages of documents, has found no evidence of any academic wrongdoing. February the 20th, I meet with the Poole Commission. I don't have a transcript of this, but it went something like this. Mr. Valvano, we don't understand why a player would possibly sell his basketball shoes or his tickets. Because incidentally, in the interim, it became known that the possibility existed that players had sold their shoes or their tickets. So the gentleman asked me, why would a player sell his shoes or his tickets? So I responded, not to be glib, for the money. I said, what do you mean for the money? So well, these are poor kids, and they might do that for the money. And so the gentleman said, don't you give them money? I said, what do you mean give them money? No, we give them room, board, books, tuition, and fees. It's a scholarship. Don't you give them spending money? I said, no, we don't. They said, well, how does a kid live? He said, who's poor, if he goes to college and that's all he gets. I said, aha, maybe you should bring that up to the NCAA because that's an NCAA violation. So I'm sitting there. We're being investigated by a group of people who have no knowledge of the NCAA rules. Yet we've already called the NCAA in. And this is what it was like. It's kind of like an Alphonse and Gaston, a Keystone Cops thing. We've got people from the system investigating us who are not familiar with the rules. Sunday, July 23rd, the News and Observer called for Dr. Polton's resignation, charging that he has shirked his responsibility to NC State University. Thursday, July 27th. This is a very bittersweet day for me because July 27th is my oldest daughter's 20th birthday, but it also is the day that Personal Fouls is definitely out, and it's the first time we get a chance to read this book. And without going into great detail, it is filled with just mistake after mistake. It has been trashed by most critics. Monday, July 31st, a front-page banner headline in the News and Observer, "You Fuller." The man I mentioned is the director of NC State's academic tutoring program. Charges that academic abuses and manipulation of rules to keep athletes eligible were routine. what really caused me my biggest problem was this July 31st article in the N&O by Dr. Hugh Fuller. He charged that, one, the faculty was pressured by the coaches in basketball, not me, because I never talked to a professor, but I was too smart, they alluded to. I had my assistants, my lackeys go and pressure professors on campus to give kids in basketball better grades. He never said grades were changed, but that we pressured them. Two, tutors did the work for the athletes. Now, remember, he's in charge of the tutoring program, but he said that we got tutors to actually do the work for the athletes. Three, that athletes, basketball players, would try to take professors who were more receptive to them. Four, that basketball players would try to take the easiest courses that they could find. Five, that basketball players would utilize a drop and add rule in the policy of the university, which would allow them to actually drop a semester of bad grades. Okay? Now, those were the major allegations. Now, when you put all of these things out in the paper, and it sounds so heinous, all right, then when you go and break down each one of them, all right, first of all, let's take the tutors. The tutors that worked with our basketball players were all former high school teachers. These people were devastated by this allegation. They wrote letters to the newspaper, wrote letters to the TV stations, wrote letters to the faculty senate, saying that they never, ever did the work for any basketball player. The people, their integrity was questioned. Again, what they said, though, didn't seem to matter. Once the allegation is out there, it seems everyone's, aha, right? Well, the fact is that never happened. Taking a look at the charge of players trying to take professors who are receptive. That's right, guilty is charged there. Anyone who's been to college, does this shock anybody? Players probably did do that. They looked for professors who were more receptive. That's right. This was the one document which started the avalanche of support for academic problems at NC State. And as we go further through this, you'll see how the university just became oblivious, to the reality of it as they tried to, I hate to use the word scapegoat, but somewhere along the line, someone was going to be held totally responsible for the academics. And that someone is this guy talking right here. Monday, August 21st, Dr. Bruce Polton resigns as Chancellor of North Carolina State University. He'd hired me. He'd supported me. I was very, very disappointed that this had happened, especially over a basketball issue. Thursday, August 24th, editorial in the News and Observer, a clean sweep at State. Now that Chancellor Polton has resigned, it is an example Mr. Valvano should follow, and thus relieve Mr. Spangler and the Board of Governors of the necessity to see that the coach does so. This is the first time. Now the N&O has now stated its intention that I, too, should be removed. Saturday, August the 26th, the Charlotte Observer headlines, UNC probe exonerates Valvano. A university investigation criticized the basketball program, but cleared Coach Jim Valvano of any wrongdoing. This same article did not appear in the News and Observer. September the 6th, the NCAA investigation ends, and Dave Didion presents NC State with an official inquiry which lists only 8 violations. So in this entire investigation by the Pool Commission, by the NC State Faculty Senate, and by the NCAA, it comes down to that the Pool Commission states that the spirit of rules were broken, but there was no wrongdoing by me or any member of my staff, and that the NCAA finds only 8 violations total, which I will go over in a little bit, but that's it. To be honest, I felt somewhat relieved. I felt that, especially the article of August 26th, which stated that I was exonerated, I felt that we might be able to now withstand all this and that we could go on. And unfortunately, that was not to be. Sunday, October 1st, Dr. Larry Monteith, the Dean of the College of Engineering, is appointed the interim chancellor. We have a meeting, and he states that He does not think there are any problems we can't overcome, but the one that bothers him is the graduation rate of basketball players. He says he thinks I should graduate 100% of the basketball players who are recruited. And I said, that's a wonderful idea, but how about the school that only graduates 24%? I don't teach. He said, my standards should be higher than the universities. Sunday, October 15th, basketball practice begins again for what is to be my last season at NC State. Friday, November 3rd, the violations are now listed for the public to see. 8 violations. Here they are, folks. 1, players sold complimentary tickets. 2, players sold basketball shoes. 3, players received free jewelry. 4, players received meals at the home of a booster. 5, players received meals purchased in town by a booster. 6, an assistant coach took a recruit to a TV station to meet a former player. 7, a player slept in the home of an alumnus. And 8, we had not properly administered an eligibility progress form. That's it. Now, how is that reported in the paper? Illegal meals, illegal lodging, illegal transportation, academic abuse. My goodness gracious. I mean, these are the 8 violations. In fact, when we go to the NCAA committee, right, they drop most of the allegations. Free jewelry was found to be, that wasn't the case. And so that allegation was dropped. The improperly administering an eligibility form, that was also dropped. The only thing that was kept was the sale of complimentary tickets, the sale of basketball shoes, and then what they call not properly monitoring your program, because boosters did give free lodging and free meals to a player. Now, let me explain what happened there. We had 4 of our players on Christmas Eve went to the home of an alumnus and had dinner, went to midnight mass, slept over, and then had Christmas dinner there. That was the violation of illegal meals and lodging. The other one was Chris Corciani had mononucleosis, was in the hospital for a week. After the week, the school's insurance ran out, and Chris was to stay back in his dormitory. His mother and father and the team doctor felt he shouldn't stay alone. But since he was contagious, know where exactly he should go. So without asking us, the basketball staff, Chris went to the home of someone who is close to our program, a gentleman who is a member of our booster club. Slept at his house one night. That also was a violation. By actual definition, ours were not a major violation, in that a school receives a direct competitive advantage. However, the committee determined the case was major in nature because the university failed to control its intercollegiate athletic program in compliance with the rules and regulations in 2 primary areas. So there were 2 violations. Those were tickets and shoes. I could not have felt more vindicated. After all that was written, all that was said, the pool commission found no real academic wrongdoing or culpability by any member of my staff. The NCAA found 2 violations, which they termed were going to be considered major, although they were not major of nature. The sanctions were basically minor, and I was vindicated by the NCAA itself. I really felt that things were going to be okay. Incidentally, while all this was going on, we were playing basketball, and we were playing pretty well. We had some good wins, and we had some very emotional times. And as I mentioned before, the highlight of the whole year for me was being in the locker room. And I recall a couple of things in particular. We played in the Tournament of Champions in Charlotte, and it was early in the year, and the teams were Pittsburgh, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, and NC State. In the midst of all this turmoil, it was certainly difficult to concentrate, but by the same token, that was a respite for me. Well, we played Ohio State the first game in the tournament, and we won, and then we played Pittsburgh, a nationally ranked team, and we won again. And we won the championship, and it was great. But Tommy Gugliotta, who was a sophomore, Tommy was a youngster whose dad and my dad were very dear friends. And Frank Sr. would say to me, he's got 3 sons, and he wants one to play for me. Well, the first one I went to see, I didn't think was good enough. The second one I didn't think was good enough. Finally, I got a call a couple of years ago from Frank Gugliotta, Sr., and he said, I've got one son left, Tommy Gugliotta, and I think he can play for you. And I said, okay, Frank, I'll take a look. I went out to Long Island to watch him, and I didn't think the kid was good enough again. I then found out that Mr. Gugliotta, Frank Sr., had cancer. And I said, I know that my dad would like very much for me to take care of his friend's son. So I had Tommy visit the school, and I said to him, Tommy, I'm not sure you're good enough to play here, but I want to offer you a scholarship. And I said, now I want you to know, I wasn't sure Spud Webb was good enough to play here, and he's in the NBA. I wasn't sure Vinny Del Negro was good enough to play here, and he's in the NBA. I said, so he can't measure the heart of every player, but I just want you to know I can't promise you anything. If you want to go somewhere else, that's fine. Tommy was recruited by Fairfield and Iona, schools of that level. And Tommy said he wanted to come. It was freshman year. He didn't play very often. And during that freshman year, Tommy's father passed away. Sophomore year now, this is early in the season, Tommy Gugliotta is the most valuable player in our tournament of champions. And as we walk off the court, and his mom was at the game, I took Tommy in the corner of the locker room, and I said, Tommy, you know something? Today, both your father and my father are very proud of their sons. And we both hugged and cried. And Tommy today is a 6'9", one of the best players in the country, and he'll probably be in the NBA someday. And it's just those kinds of things happened during this last year, which helped me to get through the very tough periods of time. Plus, I got one of the great letters with a statement by Albert Schweitzer, which said that in everyone's life at some time, the inner light goes out. It is then burst again into flame by an encounter with another human being. We should all be thankful for those people who rekindle our inner spirit. On Monday, February 26th, I am told, and there's a story in the paper, that Charles Shackelford, player with the New Jersey Nets who played for us at NC State, admits to having accepted nearly $65,000 from two agents while he was in school, which would be obviously an NCAA violation. This is reported immediately to the NCAA, and which means it's going to trigger another investigation, and the whole thing can start all over again. As depressing as that was, it was nothing compared to the bombshell on Wednesday, February 28th. I'm in the locker room at College Park, Maryland, getting ready to play the Terrapins of the University of Maryland, when Mr. Mark Bockelman, our sports information director, comes into the locker room and hits me with the bombshell. He said that ABC News is going to go on the air very shortly that night with a clip from a former NC State player who will claim that there was point shaving at NC State. And I really felt at that point, it was the first time in the entire ordeal that I felt this was something that I probably could not handle personally and professionally. Thursday, March 1st, I go to New York to meet with my lawyer and my friend, Mr. Art Kaminsky. And he agrees with me that in the best interest probably of the university and also of me, that I'm going to have to step aside. It's just going to be much too much to handle. I then say, I asked Art, will he come down to the university to speak with the school's attorneys in the university about what it is they would like to do. And at this point, I have absolutely no animosity, it's almost, to me, a fait accompli. It's something has to happen now, and we should do it in a professional manner. I should point out my contract that I had with the university states that if I am terminated for any reason, right, other than an NCAA violation or a felony, which I'm not involved in either, then the university had to pay me $500,000, and the Wolfpack Club, the booster club, which I had a contract with, had to pay me $375,000. So $875,000. By the same token, if I left the university to try to coach somewhere else, I had to give the school $500,000. So it was, by most people's viewpoint, a fair contract. And so I felt perfectly at ease with my lawyer to come down to North Carolina State and say, if you people would like me to step down, let us negotiate with the contract. I felt that $875,000 was probably too much money. I felt that that was an awful lot of money, and the school had been good to me, and so I was looking for some type of a settlement which would be fair to them and fair to me. I was not prepared for what was to transpire. On Saturday, March 3rd, Art Kaminsky met with Dr. Hoffenberg, with Becky French, and with George Worsley, who's the Vice President of Financial Affairs. I sat in my office. Art called me in an hour, and he said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "What?" He said, "They're offering you nothing." I said, "What?" He said, "Their stance is that you wanted to quit, and if you quit, there's no reason they have to give you any money." I said, "Quit? I don't want to quit. They want me to stay. I'll stay and coach." I didn't think that's what they would want. And so let's do. He said, "I know what you're saying, but that's what they're saying." I said, "Well, Art, you go back and you tell them I'm not quitting, and I want them to live up to the contract." On Friday, April the 6th, is when my attorney called me to say that NC State would announce the next day that I would be terminated from my job as basketball coach. He wanted to know, did I want to go to court? I said no, I did not. I was obviously disappointed, dejected, and upset, but I said no. Whatever it is they want to pay me is fine. The Wolfpack Club, again, everyone attacks boosters. The Wolfpack Club had decided to honor 100% their contract with me. The university certainly showed no such integrity. But when it was all said and done, I got $613,000, which is probably more than I would have asked for when I first started the negotiation. But the one thing you can't ever put a price tag on is your integrity and your reputation, which I felt the university had certainly smeared from the beginning of this episode, starting on January 7th.
WPTF's Tony Rigsby.
All right, Adam, Jim Valvano has just entered the room, and he is getting ready immediately. He is looking at a copy of the statement that has been released by Chancellor Monteith, and he is ready to address the media at this time. Jim Valvano taking a very quick glance at the statement that you heard from Bob Ellison just moments ago. He's turning the page and now looking at the copy of the agreement. Here he is, Jim Valvano.
I'd like to paraphrase W.C. Fields, who I guess was famous for saying, "I'd rather be in Philadelphia." I was supposed to be in Pittsburgh today doing a basketball clinic and did not learn of Chancellor Monteith's decision until on Saturday, April 7th. And as I said a long time
Interim
ago,
Chancellor Larry Monteith made the announcement and took no questions from the media. I spoke to all the members of the media and told them I prefer to look forward rather than to look in the past. They asked me if I thought that I had been a scapegoat, and I said I'd rather not address that. I'll let others decide that. But the fact is, some humorous things is on Saturday Night Live. Dennis Miller, on his weekend update, stated on one particular show, he said, Saturday Night Live news team has just found out that, or has discovered that the greenhouse effect, the stock market crash of '87, and the Vietnam War were all caused by this man, Jim Valvano, the basketball coach at North Carolina State. Robin Williams, on a radio show, was asked why he didn't win the Oscar for Dead Poets Society when he was the favorite. And he said, "I blame it all on Jim Valvano." I think most reasonable people would look at all that took place and said, well, someone had to pay the price, and I guess that happened to me. And which led me to the day I got my boxes and met the Chicago Cubs man in my office. We've gone full cycle. As painful as these 15 months were for me, and as difficult it is to address the book Personal Fouls, a couple of things I need to make clear. At no time have I attempted to absolve myself of any responsibility for what took place at North Carolina State University.
One thing I fully understand is executive responsibility. I was the boss. Therefore, I'm responsible for what took place, and I accept that. But I will fight to the death for the difference between responsibility and culpability. There's a tremendous difference between the man in charge when some people did some things wrong, which I had no knowledge, and so I accept that responsibility and also the termination of my job. But at no time did I or any member of my staff or anybody condone or have any knowledge of wrongdoing which was done by any players or boosters or other people. Having said that, I think that the book Personal Fouls did provide and raise some issues, although the book itself was not very accurate, of the problems that we have in college sports for the athletes themselves. And after 23 years in the business, I'd like to propose some scenarios, some problems, and some prescriptions for change, which might make, I think, the world of intercollegiate athletics a little bit better than it is today. Number one is academics. And I think the first thing we have to do in academics is honesty. Universities need to tell the public that, yes, we want to play at the highest level of competition, and we are going to admit some youngsters below our normal standard of admissions. Say it. Let the people know. Don't couch it in euphemistic terms. Once you have been honest to the public in that way, you will remove a great deal of what a lot of the writers find after the fact as being the slime of sport, the underbelly of sport, the seedy underbelly. It's not the case if you tell them up front. This is what we do. All right. Now, having said that, you've got to be more intelligent in your relationship with coaches, and that is the contract with the coach should stipulate what you expect of the coach. If you're going to expect the coach to just winning and losing, well, then state it. But if you're going to hold that coach to a standard, if your university graduates 50% of its student body, you want the coach to graduate 90, write it. State it, and then let the general public know. Now, once you do that, I think the second thing in academics that you have to do is raise the standards. If kids are not graduating because the standards are too low and they can't compete, Prop 48 means if you have a 700-year college boards and a 2.0 in a core curriculum in high school, you're eligible to participate. Well, when you're going to schools where the kids have 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, it's hard to compete. I think you need to raise the standards, not limit the opportunity. You shouldn't say that the standards should go up to 1,000, and if you don't have it, you can't come to school. No, when I say raise the standard, I mean the standard to play, eligibility. You should never try to cut opportunities, especially for minority students. I think that any student that's admitted below the normal standard of admission by a university, that youngster should not be allowed to play until he has a 2.0, which is the standard, the minimum to graduate from most universities. You now will have eliminated all those kids who have no interest in college, but just an interest to play ball. And lastly, I think the NCAA itself has to just be totally revamped. It needs to be able to afford due process of law to the people they investigate. Right now, that's not the case. They know this may come as a shock. The NCAA does not have to prove anything. They only have to think you did it. And if they think you did it, they can administer any punishment that they want. That's not right. You should have due process of law. And I think that will solve some of the problems where some of the schools feel that they have not been dealt with fairly. As far as the athletes go, the rules have to be changed. They should be realistic rules. They should be, a youngster who has a meal over someone's, I'll give you an idea of how crazy the rules and regulations are. If I asked you a question, could you have an athlete over your house for dinner? If you said yes, you're right, you can. Could you pick the athlete up and drive him to your home for dinner? No, the answer to that is no, you cannot. So if the athlete can't get there, he can't go there. Now, that makes no sense at all. All right, let's take the other case. The youngster has no car to come to your home for dinner. Can you go meet that youngster at McDonald's and buy the youngster a burger? The answer? No. right? But if you could, that athlete can come to your home and you can feed him a filet mignon dinner. You could go $150 for a dinner for a kid at your house, but you can't buy a kid a burger at McDonald's. So what I'm suggesting, in a nutshell, is that we change the rules to make them more reasonable. That we also change the punishment for the rules. That if a coach violates, yes, the school should be punished severely and the coach should be fired. But if it's outside people, the coach certainly shouldn't be punished for that. And I don't think the school should be severely punished, but the youngster should be. He should lose his eligibility. That's what I think could happen there. The academic issue is much more important. I think they should raise the standards of eligibility. And lastly, I think we should have a mandatory drug testing program. And I think that if we're going to ensure that the players who are on the court are drug-free, are making progress to their degree, and are not violating and breaking real rules, I think we need to take a strong stance now to bring back some of the integrity to college athletics. A lot of people have asked me, how's it going? I call it my airport poll. When all the dust is settled, what's happening? Well, it's been a while since I coached my last game, and I'll tell you how things are going for me. I was very fortunate to be offered, and I accepted a job with ABC Sports to be an analyst. That's a whole new world. And the very first gig I had with ABC was to do Wide World of Sports with Lynn Swann, the former Steeler great and holder of 4 Super Bowl rings. And so I found myself in the summer after my demise in Orlando doing a Wide World of Sports segment with the Harlem Globetrotters. And I was in my first important meeting with Mr. Jeff Mason, who is executive producer of ABC Sports, and about 7, 8, 9 adults from ABC, producers, assistant producers, directors, camera people, and then 3 executives from Disney World, where the shoot would take place for the Harlem Globetrotters. And I'm a rookie, so I don't want to say anything, don't want to cause any problem, just want to do what I'm told. So I sit down, and Jeff Mason begins the meeting saying he wants to talk about what's going to take place on Saturday. This is only on a Tuesday. He wants to go backwards. The game, we're doing a Harlem Globetrotter special, and he said the game will be on Saturday, and he looks at me and he says, Jim, I thought you'd like to know, since we're at Disney World, that what you're going to have for the game is Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and Miss Piggy. And now I try very hard not to laugh, but as I look around, no one seems to find this humorous, and they all write down on their clipboards, so I write on my clipboard the mice and the pig, right, for Saturday. And everyone seems pretty pleased that we're going to have Mickey, Minnie, and Miss Piggy. When someone from, executive from Disney says, wait a second, we didn't promise you Miss Piggy. We can get you Mickey and Minnie, but Miss Piggy, I don't know. So I don't find this to be too difficult to handle. When Jeff Mason says, we're not coming down here without the pig. We expect Miss Piggy. It's one of those, right, Jim? And I have this big decision, my first major decision here. I say, well, Miss Piggy's pretty important. And so the executives from Disney now say, well, let me tell you, I don't know if we can get that done. He said, maybe this will work. He said, Jim, he says, we can probably get you Roger Rabbit, Chip and Dale, and Goofy instead of Miss Piggy. Now, I'm not a general manager, but this seemed like a pretty good trade. I kind of like Goofy. I've always liked Goofy. I thought, hey, they have the Goof Man here instead of Miss Piggy. I can deal with that. But I looked and saw the frown on Jeff Mason's face, so, I had to make a decision. I said, I said, I think we should hold out for the entire pig package. And then I couldn't take it anymore. I just started to laugh. And finally I said, come on, folks, we're talking about a pig here. And finally everybody laughed. I said, here's my introduction to TV sports. We actually had on Saturday, here I am on center court with Lynn Swann, going to do my very first greeting for ABC Sports, and Lynn Swann looks out and says, hey, Jim, look, it's a pink Cadillac. And I say, yes, it might be. It could be. It is. It's Miss Piggy. And my wife says to me, how's it going? I say, well, I don't know. I interviewed a pig today. And in fact, I even blew my first interview. Miss Piggy came over, and
I said to her, Miss Piggy, you must really love basketball to make a special appearance to see the Globetrotters, and then I stick the mic in her face. Unfortunately, I had forgotten that Miss Piggy does not even squeal. She doesn't say anything. So there I am on national TV with my mic in Miss Piggy's face. But I learned, I said, well, back to you, Lynn. Let him handle it. But anyway, since my April massacre at NC State, I've enjoyed my work with ABC Sports. I had an opportunity to do what I enjoy best, and that's to watch college basketball and talk about and talk at the same time. I can talk and watch the game, and I've had a great time doing it. I've gotten a chance to spend more time with my wonderful family. I got a chance to make some friends I've never had before. I've also seen that there's a world outside of basketball, and there's a whole bunch of good folks out there who can rekindle my inner spirit. And so I got to go. There are golf courses to play. There are pigs to be interviewed. And I'm looking forward to this next segment of my life.
You've been listening to Jim Valvano in this Simon & Schuster audio production of Valvano. They gave me a lifetime contract and then they declared me dead. It was written by Jim Valvano and Curry Kirkpatrick and abridged for audio by Jim Shokoff. Wolfpack music was contributed by Larry Davis and Davis Bowcatcher Music. Recording and post-production mixed by Steven Erickson. The associate producer was Linda Ross. Valvano, They Gave Me a Lifetime Contract and Then They Declared Me Dead was directed and produced by Karen Froman. Look for more Simon & Schuster productions at your local bookstore or record store. To order by mail, use the enclosed card and postpaid envelope. Or for faster service, call our toll-free number 1-800-678-2677.